Let us put ourselves in the presence of God, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty Father, you are the highest among all of us. We praise and glorify your most holy name. Thank you for all the blessings that you have given us, especially the gift of life, our families, friends, and loved ones. Please forgive us from our sins and protect us from every calamities that may become our way. We also pray for the success of this webinar and continue to bless each other and every one of us according to your plans and purpose that you have set before us for your greater glory. This we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Ayan. Once again, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat, sa mga estudyante, faculty and staff. Binabati ko po pala ulit ang lahat, yung mga estudyante po natin, faculty and staff, at syempre yung mga partner communities po natin na naririto po ngayong umaga sa ating Zoom webinar. No? Ako po, Angelica Aquino, or you can call me Angel na lang po. I am from the Trinitian Community Development Section, ang extension office po ng Trinity University of Asia, at ang magsisilbing tagapagpadaloy o moderator po natin para sa programang patungkol sa orientation po on the Anti-Bastos Law and the Safe Spaces Act. So upang magbigay sa atin ng panimulang pagbati at para palawigin yung konteksto ng ating pagtitipon at pag-aaral ngayong araw, naririto po ang kasalukuyang officer in charge ng Student Affairs Center, si Mr. Homer C. Balmes po. Sir Homer, good morning po.
Pagbati ng isang masagana at mabiyayang araw para sa ating lahat, no? Mula dito sa Trinity University of Asia. So we would like to extend our deepest appreciation to everyone who took part on this very important endeavor. No? Mahalaga at somehow importanteng ma-appreciate natin yung context on how we need to understand safe spaces and of course Anti-Bullying Act in our online campus or in our campus in general. So generally, napakahalaga ng context of us understanding na bawat isa sa atin, mula sa faculty, sa mga mag-aaral, sa administration, at sa iba't ibang kabahagi natin sa loob ng universidad, ay ma-appreciate natin na we took part in maintaining and creating learning environment that is appropriate and of course that is safe and conducive for everyone. So the context of Safe Spaces Act generally highlights yung ating pagbibigay ng pansin sa gender in general, and of course yung context of maging maging malaya, no? At maging safe itong learning environment natin ngayon para sa kung anumang context of violence, no? Or dun sa konteksto ng bullying. So may it be online and of course in the context of our situation right now in a learning platform. So we would like to extend our deepest appreciation to our invited guests for this morning. Of course, for Safe Spaces Act, Attorney Mylen, and for anti-bullying, si Attorney Ron Gamboa. So it is important for us to look into ways and means how to take part and somehow appreciate our roles, no? In providing an enabling environment and of course a safe environment for everyone, diba? So we are excited. We are with you, no, in this learning process at mula sa Trinity University of Asia, once again in behalf of our university president, Dr. Wilfred Yu, our Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Gisela D.A. Luna, and of course our Vice President for Administration and Finance, Ms. Matilda Asuncion, and all the administrators, no, who are currently at sa iba't ibang kabahagi natin sa loob ng universidad, ay ma-appreciate natin na we took part, no, in maintaining and creating a learning environment that is appropriate and of course that is safe and conducive for everyone. So the context of Safe Spaces Act generally highlights yung ating pagbibigay ng pansin sa gender in general, and of course yung context of maging maging malaya, no, at maging safe itong learning environment natin ngayon para sa kung anumang context of violence, no, or dun sa konteksto ng bullying. So may it be online, and of course in the context of our situation right now in a learning platform. So we would like to extend our deepest appreciation, no, to our invited guests for this morning. Of course, for Safe Spaces Act, Attorney Mylen, and for anti-bullying, no, si Attorney Ron Gamboa. So it is important for us to look into ways and means how to take part and somehow appreciate our roles, no, in providing an enabling environment and of course a safe environment for everyone, diba? So we are excited. We are with you, no, in this learning process at mula sa Trade University of Asia, once again, in behalf of our university president, Dr. Wilfred Yu, our Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Gisela D.A. Luna, and of course our Vice President for Administration and Finance, Ms. Matilda Asuncion, and all the administrators, no, who are currently we're undergoing a 3-day strategic planning here in the university, extends, no, our welcome and appreciation to everyone who took part in this very important endeavor. So muli, we would like as well to acknowledge yung great partnership, no, that we're establishing here with the Trinidad Community Development Section, headed by Ma'am Caroline Balmes, no, our God focal, who really look into ways and means to address and launch certain initiative with regards to advocating gender in development. So once again, from Trade University of Asia, we would like to again welcome you in this endeavor and have a fruitful and meaningful morning. So thank you very much and see you. Thank you.
Yan. Maraming salamat po, Sir Homer, for your greetings and sharing your take po on the importance of establishing and keeping our spaces safe for all, whether sa school man yan, sa workplace or sa community in general. Kasi totoo yung sinasabi ni ni Sir Homer kanina. At some point of our lives, nakaranas at patuloy tayong nakakaranas rather ng pambabastos o kaya ng pambubuli from our surroundings, not only because of our physical attributes, pero kasama na rin yung sexual or gender orientation natin. Sobrang prevalent niya ngayon sa ating environment. Ginagawa siyang way para ibaba tayo personally o kaya ay iparamdam somehow na tayo ay mga second class or inferior citizens. And mahahalata natin that it impacts us in many ways, no? Kasi makikita natin yun. Kahit kanina nga, before we officially start our program, meron tayong mga pinapakita na mga videos na mga entry, mga spoken word entries po coming from our students, no? Makikita natin doon sa content ng mga sinulat nila ay heavy talaga and it leaves a mark na mahirap mag-heal personally from. Kaya for me din, sobrang halaga ng discussion natin for today kasi other than educating ourselves, we can also fight back by equipping and exercising our rights, lalo na with the Anti-Bastos Law and the Safe Spaces Act of or yung RA 11313 nga na tinatawag natin. So dahil dyan, let us proceed to our learning session proper, no? Para simulan ng ating diskusyon, may I introduce our first speaker for today. Ayan. Our first speaker for today is currently at the Philippine Commission on Women and Gender. Part 2 siya ng resource pool ng Gender and Development, consultant and resource speaker of the Philippine International Convention Center or PICC mula 2018 up to present. Siya rin po ay isang GAD, Gender and Development Consultant of the Department of Transportation mula noong 2015 up to present. And the Office of the Air Force Gender and Development ng Philippine Air Force po mula pa noong 2010 up to present. And lastly, siya rin po ay isang legal consultant of the Child Protection Unit of the Philippine General Hospital mula noong May 2016 up to present. So to discuss our first topic for today about the Anti-Bastos Law, may we introduce Attorney Mylene B. Gonzalez Esquivel. Welcome po ma'am and good morning po.
Okay, good morning po sa inyong lahat. Magandang umaga po at maraming salamat po sa invitasyon ninyo na makapag-lecture po ako on the Safe Spaces Act or yung popularly known as the Bawal ang Bastos Law. So let me share lang po my slide so I can start na po with our lecture because I believe I thought kasi I have until 11 o'clock to lecture pero sige po so that's why I prepared a slide that's good for 2 hours. Anyway, I will try to discuss it very briefly po but concise naman po yung discussion natin ng atin pong Bawal ang Bastos Law. So let me share my slide po to start our discussion. By the way, in the lecture po, may mga inihanda po akong ilang poll questions para po sa ating mga participants. So in the poll questions, you can actually use po the chat box to answer po the poll question. Okay po? So our topic po for this morning, the one that is assigned to me, is to talk about the Anti-Bastos Law or the Safe Spaces Act or Republic Act 11313. So importante po na alam natin kung ano ba yung content noong bagong batas kasi mas pinag-igting po niya yung ating pong lumang batas on sexual harassment, yung Republic Act 7877. Okay? So these are the objectives po nung atin pong session. So tatlo po yung objectives natin. One is for me to be able to discuss with you yung different forms po ng gender-based sexual harassment under Republic Act 11313. Okay, sorry po. It's very important that at the end of the session, you will learn the different forms of gender-based sexual harassment under Republic Act 11313. It's also very important that at the end of the session, you know the responsibilities of the key players in the implementation of RA 11313, particularly in the context of your school. And then if you're a victim of gender-based sexual harassment, what are the things that you need to take note of so that you will be able to firm up your case in case you would like to or you decide to file a complaint against your harasser or your alleged offender. Now, why do we need to implement this RA 11313? Bakit ba nagkaroon ng amendments doon po sa ating RA 7877 or the Anti-Sexual Harassment Law? Okay? We know that the Anti-Sexual Harassment Law was enacted way back in 1995, no? Sobrang tagal na po. Tapos nagkaroon lang po siya ng revisions in 2017, no? So kumbaga parang sobrang tagal nung period na ito pong batas ay na-amend yung ating pong lumang batas on RA 7877. So bakit po ba nagkaroon ng amendment? Why the need for RA 11313? Ito kasi po yung harsh realities na kinakaharap ng mga babae, batang babae, and even mga kalalakihan po when it comes to sexual harassment. Bakit ko sinabing kalalakihan? Kasi mga kalalakihan din naman pong biktima ng gender-based sexual harassment. Hindi lang naman po kasi babae ang nagiging biktima. Although of course, in our data and the data that I'm going to present to you, marami po talaga ang biktima ng sexual harassment ay mga babae at batang babae. So harsh realities po is 88% of women aged 18 to 24 nakaka-experience po ng sexual harassment in the streets. That's based on the SWS na survey po, no? So imagine nyo po, 88%, kung meron 100%, 88 niyan, ang edad ay 18 hanggang 24, nagiging biktima po ng sexual harassment. Saan po nangyayari ang harassment? Sa streets. And 58% po ng mga harassment na to ay nangyayari po sa kalsada, sa mga small alleys kung saan wala po masyadong tao, in public vehicles and other public places. So meaning, ang harassment po ay malimit po na nai-experience ng mga babae at saka po ng mga batang babae sa mga lugar kung saan marami pong taong nagtitipon-tipon. Okay? So ano po yung mga kalimitan po based sa SWS survey? Ano po yung kalimitan na nai-experience nilang top klase ng harassment? Andyan po yung wolf whistling. Andyan po yung catcalling. Andyan po yung mga lascivious language or unsavory languages, no? Andyan po ang stalking, grabbing or touching, indecent gestures, exhibitionism, and public masturbation. So ano yung ibig sabihin ng public masturbation? It could happen inside the bus, no? So malimit sa mga pampublikong sasakyan, makikita mo nalang bigla yung katabi mo, nagmamasturbate na, or nakataklob man yung kanyang bag doon sa kanyang harapan, pero gumagalaw yung kamay. So these are the common na mga nai-experience po na type of harassment ng atin pong mga kababaihan at batang babae sa mga pampubliko po na places, no, or pampublikong sasakyan, sa mga malls po, streets and alleys. Unfortunately po, yung lumang batas po natin on sexual harassment does not cover harassment done in public places. Okay? Yung luma po nating law on sexual harassment only covers harassment sa loob po ng paaralan at saka po sa mga workplaces. It does not cover po yung harassment that are perpetrated by offenders in public spaces or public places. At the same time, the old law does not also cover harassment done online. Yung mga ginagawa po using po yung ating mga internet, no? O yung ating pong mga communications using po yung ating internet. So hindi po siya kasali sa RA 7877. Dahil po ang lumang batas natin ng sexual harassment ay limited po on harassment in the workplace and in educational and training institutions, the lawmakers and the women advocates decided to have it amended to include yung harassment po na nangyayari in public places and online. Because of the harsh realities na kinakaharap ng mga babae at batang babae ngayon sa panahon ngayon na common na po talaga yung atin pong paggamit ng mga gadgets and paggamit po ng atin pong social media platforms. So that's the reason why nagkaroon po ng amendments in our old law. Okay? At the same time din po, yung 7877 kasi po, although it's a criminal or penal law, kinakailangan po na para makapagsampa ka ng kaso sa piskalya o sa korte, kailangan patunayan mo na yung alleged offender o yung perpetrator mo ay mayroong moral ascendancy, okay? Authority or influence over doon po sa biktima. So pag missing po yung element na yon, hindi ka po makakapag-file ng kasong sexual harassment. Unlike po dun sa bagong batas na yung hierarchical relationship po ay tinanggal na po ng RA 11313. At pag-uusapan po natin yan. So yun po yung dahilan kung bakit po lumabas si Republic Act 11313 o yung ating pong tinatawag na Bawal ang Bastos Law. Yun yung popular name niya, no? Bawal ang Bastos Law. But of course, yung talaga pong official name ng batas is Safe Spaces Act. So why the need for RA 11313 again? Ang sexual harassment law po natin, like what I have said kanina, applicable lang po siya sa work, education, or training-related environment. And like what I've said also kanina, para makapagsampa ka ng kaso sa piskalya, kinakailangan pong patunayan mo na yung offender po, no, yung alleged perpetrator mo, ay merong authority, influence, or moral ascendancy sa iyo. Kasi ito po ay considered na essential element in every crime of SH under the old law, yung 7877. Okay? Ang isa rin pong nakikitang dahilan kung bakit kinakailangan po ng RA 11313 is because wala pong pinoprovide na protection from retaliatory action yung pong ating lumang batas tulad po nung hindi po tulad ngayon ng ating batas na meron na po siyang mga provisions para po doon sa biktima para protektahan po siya from retaliatory action from the alleged offender. Okay? Or doon po sa alleged perpetrator natin. So eto na po, pag-uusapan na po natin yung mga salient provisions po ng Republic Act number 11313. Ang long version po ng pangalan niya is the Act Defining Gender-Based Sexual Harassment in Streets, Public Spaces, Online Workplaces, and Educational and Training Institutions. And then it also provide measures and prescribe higher penalties as that reflected in 7877. So mas mataas po yung penalty dito po sa Republic Act 11313. So ang short version po ng pangalan ng RA 11313 is sa Safe Spaces Act. So tandaan po natin na kapag kinasuhan po kayo ng gender-based sexual harassment, so offender ka, meron kang threefold liability. Ano yung threefold liability? Pwede kang kasuhan criminally, okay? Kung nangyari ito sa loob ng eskwelahan at meron pong mga internal policy on gender-based sexual harassment ang school, pwede kang kasuhan administratively. At kung nag-result po ito sa damages, no, doon sa biktima, tulad po halimbawa ng nag-undergo siya ng psychological therapeutic sessions or psychosocial therapeutic sessions, gumastos po siya dahil nag-file siya ng kaso, then pwede rin po siya mag-file ng damages under the civil code. That's why sinasabi namin na pag ikaw ay nakasuhan ng gender-based sexual harassment, pwedeng tatlo po yung kasong kakaharapin mo. Criminal, okay, na ang penalty po ay pagkakulong under Republic Act 11313. Pwede pong administratibo kung ang iyo pong hinaras ay kasamahan mo sa trabaho o estudyante, trainee mo, apprentice mo, no? Nasa educational training institution kayo at ang sexual harassment ay pinagbabawal sa workplace mo o sa educational and training institution mo. Ano ang pwedeng penalty mo dito? Pwede kang ma-reprimand, pwede kang matanggal sa trabaho. Okay? And then yung damages, of course, monetary po ang iyong penalty dito. Pagbabayarin ka ng korte sa lahat ng civil damages na nakuha noong biktima as a result of your criminal act of gender-based sexual harassment. So yan yung threefold liability po ng gender-based sexual harassment offenders. Now, ano ba yung Safe Spaces Act? Very clear po sa Declaration of Policies, no, na sinasabi dito kinakailangan i-value po natin ang dignidad ng every human person at kinakailangan pong i-guarantee ang full respect for human rights. So therefore, para ma-ensure ito, kinakailangang i-fully implement po natin ang RA 11313. Sinasabi din po sa Declaration of Policies ng Safe Spaces Act na we do recognize yung karapatan ng babae at lalaki, no, regardless of your sex and regardless of your gender preference, to have equality in the eyes of the law, to be secure and safe, not only in private but also on streets, public spaces, online, workplace, and educational and training institutions. So kung makikita po natin, doon pa lang po sa Declaration of Policies, maliwanag na po sinasabi ng batas na i-cover nito, hindi lang po yung work and educational training institutions or work and educational training environment, but also the streets, the other public spaces, and including po yung ating online space. So dito po sa batas, may mga iba't ibang klase po ng sexual harassment na pinipinalize, no? So meron pong 4. Yung dalawa, ito pong dalawang bullet sa dulo, ito po yung galing po doon sa RA 7877. So these 2 types of harassment were integrated again in the new law. It came from the RA 7877 or the older natin on sexual harassment. But these first 2 bullets are the new ones, no? Ito po yung mga bagong in-insert, no, sa atin pong revisions, no, sa 7877 with RA 11313. So ano po yung mga different types of sexual harassment penalized under the Safe Spaces Act or RA 11313? Of course, pinipinalize po yung gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment. Pinipinalize po yung gender-based online sexual harassment. Pinipinalize din po yung gender-based sexual harassment sa workplace. At yung mga harassment po na ikukumit natin in educational and training institution. So by the way, kung mapapansin nyo po, inad po yung word na gender-based, no? Dati kasi sexual harassment lang siya. So dito po sa bagong batas, inad po yung gender-based kasi ibig sabihin nito, regardless ng gender preference or expression identity mo, kung ikaw ay biktima, kung ikaw ay perpetrator, pwede kang makasuhan, pwede kang magsampa ng kaso laban sa iyong alleged offender. So, genderless na po itong ating bagong batas. Hindi na po hina-highlight kung babae o lalaki. Basta biktima ka, regardless of your sex or gender, you can file under this law. Okay. So pag-usapan muna po natin yung tinatawag ng gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment. Ito po yung unang type of harassment na pinipinalize po under RA 11313. So paano ba kinukumit yung crime of gender-based sexual harassment in public places? Okay. So ano ba yung ginawa mo? Importante simula, ano yung ginawa mo? Bakit ka kakasuhan ng GBSH in public places? Okay, ang unang ginawa mo is, meron kang unwanted, uninvited na mga sexual actions or remarks at pinerpetrate mo to against any person. So pag sinabing any person, that could be a male, that could be a female, or regardless ng gender preference or expression or identity niya. Okay, yun kaya any person po, wala siyang tinutukoy na sex niya or gender preference niya. Okay? So tandaan natin na merong unwanted, uninvited sexual actions or remarks. Now, sinasabi po sa batas na regardless ng motive mo for committing such action or remarks, magkwa-qualify siya as crime of gender-based sexual harassment as long as it is unwanted, it is uninvited, and it is sexual, at yung action or remarks mo po ay may sexual underpinning. Okay? So, hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na, hindi naman po directed sa kanya yung akin pong sexual action or remarks. But of course, you still committed it in public place, di ba? Or, nagbibiro lang naman po ako nung sinabi ko po yung remark na yun or action na yun. Unfortunately, it is done in public place and it is unwanted, it is uninvited, at may sexual underpinning siya. So therefore, qualified siya. So hindi mo na pwedeng gamiting depensa yung nagbibiro ka lang o hindi directed para sa kanya. Okay? Because the law said, regardless of the motive for committing such action or remark. So saan mo kinumit? Of course, you committed it in public spaces. At anong naging epekto nito? Na-threaten po ang kanyang sense of personal space and physical safety. So for example, you're in a classroom. Tapos siya lang yung babae doon sa classroom ninyo. Tapos you keep on joking about greens against women. Okay, di ba? So, this female na nag-iisa, di ba? Or kung dalawa man sila, tatlo man sila, ang dami-dami yung kalalakihan dyan, di ba? Kung ito ay yung sexual action or remarks, no? Unwanted, uninvited siya, committed in public spaces, at na-threaten yung personal space, yung sense ng personal space and physical safety nung babae na yon o ng mga babae na yon, they can validly say na you are committing GVSH in public spaces or in public places. Okay? So yun po yung paano nakukommit ang GBSH in public places. At tandaan natin na may unwanted, uninvited sexual action and remarks against any person. At regardless ng motive ito for committing such action or remarks, kinumit mo in public places at ang epekto po ay na-threaten ang sense of personal space and physical safety po ng tao. So ano bang ibig sabihin ng public place, ma'am? Kasi we keep on saying in public places. Now, when we say public places, it covers all of the enumerations as reflected in the slide. No? Ano yung mga ito? Covered po yung streets and alleys, public parks, schools. Okay, kasi sinabi ko, di mo nasa school. Kanina, example ko. Buildings, malls, bars, restaurants, transportation terminals, public markets. Kasama din po yung space used as evacuation centers, government offices, or public utility vehicles. Now, paano yung Grab? Private vehicle yon. Well, covered pa rin po siya kasi sabi po ng batas, considered na public space po yung mga private vehicles covered by application-based transport network service. So, ang Grab po is an application-based transport network service, di ba? So, kahit private yung vehicle niya because siya ay nag-apply, no? Para po maging masakyan po ng mga ng mga tao, ng publiko yung kanyang sasakyan, covered po siya sa definition ng public spaces. And other recreational spaces such as but limited to cinema halls, theaters, and spa that are open to the public or where public go, no? So yun po yung ibig sabihin ng public spaces. So yung school po, considered yan na public space. So pag nag-commit ka ng sexual harassment sa eskwelahan, that is considered gender-based sexual harassment in public places. Okay. So ano yung mga ano po yung mga specific acts, no, of gender-based sexual harassment committed in streets and public places, and what are their corresponding penalties? Yeah. So in discussing po the different acts ng gender-based sexual harassment that are committed in public places, we need to understand that they are categorized into three. Yung pong GVSH in public spaces, they are categorized into three. Actually, ang tawag ko po sa mga to is light offense, less grave, at saka grave, or light offense, less serious, saka serious. Yan, na mga types of gender-based harassment in public places. So classification A is yung nagpo-fall po under the light offense. And what are these? Ayan. Andyan po yung cursing. Pagmumura, no? Yung pagko-curse. Puta na to, mamatay ka na sana. Yung ganyan, no? Nakaka-threaten yun nakaka-threaten yun ng personal space ng isang tao. Wolf whistling, pagsipol, o, di ba? Catcalling, yan. Leering and intrusive gazing, unwanted invitations. Yan. Kasama din po dito yung mga misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist na mga slurs. So para i-define natin at mas madali po natin maintindihan ano bang ibig sabihin ng misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist slurs, which is of course considered as light offense of GVSH in public places, I would like to enjoin everyone to use the chat box. Okay? So in the chat box, you just put your answer, whether yes or no po yung answer nyo. Misogynist ka ba kapag sinabi mo na mas magaling talaga ang mga lalaki kaysa babae pagdating sa decision making? Yes or no? You can use po the chat box. You can write your answer, yes or no lang po. Misogynist ka ba kapag sinabi mo na mas magaling talaga ang mga lalaki kaysa sa babae pagdating sa decision making? Yes or no? Please use po the chat box para malaman ko kung ano ang tingin nyo dito. Ayan, so may sumasagot na po. Okay. So mostly po, ang sinagot po ng ating mga kasamahan, ang mga participants ay yes. Okay. Tama po kayo. Misogynist ka kapag sinabi mo na mas magaling talaga ang mga lalaki kaysa babae pagdating sa decision making. Bakit? Ano bang ibig sabihin ng misogynist statement or misogynist slurs? Okay. Pag sinabing misogynistic remarks or slurs, we are referring to statements in whatever form or however delivered that are indicative of the feeling of hating women. Okay? So meron ka talagang pinapakitang galit sa mga kababaihan or the belief that men are inherently better than women. So doon sa statement mo, hindi ka naman nagpapakita ng galit sa mga babae, no? Pero pinapakita mo yung paniniwala mo that men are inherently better than women. Kasi sinabi mo mas magaling talaga ang mga lalaki kaysa sa babae pagdating sa decision making. That is a belief that men are inherently better than women. It may not show your feeling of hating women, but it shows your belief that men are inherently better than women. So that's a misogynistic remark or slur. Okay? So ano ba yung mga misogynistic remark na hating women? Yung mga babae talaga buwisit talaga sa buhay yan. O, di ba? That is a misogynistic remark. That is a statement that is clearly indicative of a feeling of hating women. Okay. Next naman, another one po. Sasagutin po tayo ulit ng yes or no, mga kapatid, no? Yan. Ang statement bang ito ay masasabi nating transphobic slur? Bakit kasi nagpupumilit yang si Charisse na magpakalalaki hindi naman siya makakabuntis? Yes or no? Ano po yung statement natin? Pwede ba natin siyang sabihin na transphobic? Bakit kasi nagpupumilit ang si Charisse na magpakalalaki hindi naman siya makakabuntis? Yes or no? Okay, so most of your answer po is yes. That's correct. Kasi when we say transphobic remark or slurs po, we are referring to any statement in whatever form or however delivered po that are indicative of fear, hatred, or aversion. Aversion kanino? To a person whose gender identity or expression do not conform with their sex assigned at birth. Okay? So kung pinanganak, si Charisse, pinanganak po siyang babae. Pero yung kanya pong gender identity is that of masculine. Ang expression niya po ay pang masculine din. So hindi nagko-conform yung kanya pong identity and expression sa sex assigned at birth niya. Now, yung statement pong yon, that's indicative po of aversion, okay? Or konting hatred, no, towards people na hindi nga po nagko-conform ang identity and expression sa kanilang sex assigned at birth. So that's what you call transphobic remark or slurs. Okay. Ito po. Ito naman po, sagutin din po natin sa ating chat box para naman po kayo ay makapag-participate, no? Yan. Ang statement bang ito ay masasabi nating homophobic slur? Yang mga bakla, salot sa lipunan. Yes or no? Okay? Sige po. Okay, so marami po nagsabi sa atin ng yes. Tama po, ang statement pong ito ay homophobic slur. Bakit po natin sinabing homophobic remark or slur siya? Kasi pag sinabi pong homophobic remark or slur, we are technically referring to any statements in whatever form or however delivered po na indicative naman po ng fear, hatred, or aversion sa isang tao na napiperceive niya po or actually na-identify niya po ang kanyang sarili as lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, pansexual, and other persons po na merong diverse sexual orientation, identity, or expression. O kaya naman po mga tao na napiperceive nila po or actually po nakaka-experience ng same-sex attraction. Okay, so sila po yung mga tatawating homosexuals. Okay, at kapag meron kang mga remarks or slurs or statements sa mga homosexuals natin that are indicative of fear, hatred, or aversion towards them, that is considered a homophobic remark or slur. Okay? Ito naman, another one. Sexist po ba sexist po bang masasabi ang remark na to? Basta lalaking army, maraming babae. Yes or no? Sexist ba ang remark na to? Basta lalaking army, maraming babae. Yes or no? Okay, may sumagot po ng yes. Yung iba, ano pong tingin nyo? Nag-aalangan kayo, ano? Sige, ayan. Okay, dalawa na po yung sumagot ng yes. Okay, so yan. So, sa inyo pong, sa chat box po natin, may mga sumagot po ng yes. 4 po sila nagsabi ng, hindi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. May 10 sumagot ng yes. Opo, tama po. This is actually a sexist remark. Pero ang biktima po ay yung lalaki. So, ibig sabihin, ang sexist remark pala, pwedeng babae, pwedeng lalaki ang biktima. Tama po. Kasi, pag sinabi natin sexist remark or slur, we are referring to any statements in whatever form or however delivered that are indicative of prejudice, stereotyping, or discrimination on the basis of sex. Typically nga lang po, ang biktima ng sexist remark or slur ay women. Pero, may mga lalaki din pong biktima ng sexist remark. For example, pag sinasabi mong chauvinist pig, male chauvinist pig, that is a sexist remark, di ba? That is discrimination, that's prejudice. That is stereotyping that all men are chauvinist. Kaya po yung statement kanina, sa lalaking army, maraming babae, that is stereotyping. That men are polygamous. And in fact, hindi naman lahat ng lalaki polygamous, di ba? Or babaero. Yan. So, sa sexist remark po, kalimitan po nagiging biktima natin ay mga babae, pero pwede po maging biktima din po ng mga sexist comments natin or sexist remark or slurs natin ang kalalakihan. Unlike yung misogynistic remark, directed talaga siya sa babae lang. Okay? Yeah. So, bakit ko po diniscuss to? Because all of this, no, yung po misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist slurs, it falls under the light offense or classification A ng GBSH in public places or public spaces. Ano pa yung iba? Yan, andyan po yung persistent, unwanted comment on one's appearance. O mga kapatid, huwag kayong paulit-ulit na nagsasabi ng, uy, ang ganda mo naman, uy, ang sexy mo naman. Pagka persistent na po yan, uninvited, unwanted, hindi mahinihingi po ng biktima, no? Or ng survivor po yung inyong mga statement, that would qualify already as GBSH in public places. Okay? Especially kung ginawa mo yan, sinabi mo yan doon sa mga public places as defined under the law. Ano pa? Relentless request for one's personal details such as name, contact, and social media details or destination. Paggamit po ng mga words, gestures, or action that ridicule on the basis of sex, gender or sexual orientation, identity, and expression. Yung mga malimis na sabi natin, hoy bakla, o di ba? Hoy tibo. O, these are words that ridicule. Ridicule po yung kanilang gender or sexual orientation, identity, or expression. Mga gestures naman, for example, pag dumaan po yung kasamahan mo na gay, ginagaya mo yung kanyang paglalakad. Di ba? That is a gesture that ridicule the gender or sexual orientation, identity, and expression of that particular person. And if you do that in public places as defined under the law, that would qualify as GBSH in public places, under classification A, of course. And then persistent telling of sexual jokes, no? Yung paulit-ulit pong pagbibiro ng mga jokes po na green, no? Yung double meaning, o yung may underlying meaning, no? Na pag tinignan mo yung underlying meaning niya, bastos talaga siya. Ayan, so pasok din po yan sa GBSH in public places. Classification A, kung ginawa mo sa pampublikong mga lugar, tulad po ng nasa definition po ng ating batas. Paggamit po ng sexual names, comments, and demands, or mga statements po na pwede po mag-invade sa personal space po or matreten po ang sense of personal safety ng isang individual o isang tao. So lahat pong ito, pag ginawa mo sa public places as defined under the law, so sa eskwelahan, sa campus natin, again, ang campus ay public space, or public place ang campus as defined under RA 11313. Pag ginawa mong lahat ito doon, pwede kang makasuhan, no? Under classification A or light offense of GBSH in public spaces. Okay. Anong penalty niyan? Pagka classification A or light offense ng GBSH in public places. Ito yung first offense, ito yung penalties mo. Sa first offense, pagpa-fining ka po ng 1,000 pesos ng korte. Tapos, ida-direct ka po ng court to do community service of 12 hours and then inclusive po ito ng attendance to gender sensitivity training to be conducted by PNP, LGU, and PCW. For second offense po, pwede po kayong makulong ng 6 to 10 days, arrest to minor, or pwede kang ipag-fine ni judge ng 3,000 pesos. So, depende. Kung may 3,000 ka, di mag-fine ka. para hindi ka makulong. Pero again, depende po kay judge to ha, kasi sabi niya dito, or. So, pwedeng pumili po si judge na ipakulong ka ng 6 to 10 days or pag-fining ka ng 3,000 pesos. Okay. Now, kung inulit mo na naman ulit yung pag-commit ng GVSH in public places under classification A or yung light offense, pangatlo mo na, ikukulong ka na po ng 11 to 30 days plus magfa-fine ka po ng 10,000 pesos. So dito, wala nang pagpipilian si judge, okay? Ipapakulong ka niya at saka pagfa-fining ka po niya ng 10,000 pesos. Yan yung penalty para po sa GVSH in public places under light offense or classification A. Now, meron po tinatawag na classification B ng GVSH in public spaces or public places. Ano po yung classification B? Ito po yung nagpo-fall. Ang tawag ko dito ay less serious offense ng GVSH in public places. Okay? So, ano yung nagpo-fall dito? When you make offensive body gestures at someone, when you expose private parts for sexual gratification with the effect of demeaning, harassing, threatening, or intimidating the offended party, when you flash your private parts, pina-flash mo yung private parts mo. Ano ba yung private parts? It could be the breast, it could be the sexual organ or your butt, no? O yung buttocks mo. Yan. Public masturbation, yung ginagawa sa loob ng sasakyan, no? Groping, and of course, mga other similar lewd sexual actions. O mga kapatid, this is a catch-all provision, ha? Anything that are similar to those enumerated and has lewdness, ayan, could be considered as less serious offense of GVSH in public spaces. It would fall under classification B. Anong penalty niyan? Mas mataas na po dun sa classification A. In fact, for the first offense, kung dati sa classification A, ang fine mo ay 1,000 pesos, dito po for your first offense, ang fine mo na po ay 10,000 pesos. And then of course, idadirect ka pa rin po ni judge na mag-render ng community service of 12 hours, which is inclusive, of course, again, of attendance to GST to be conducted by PNP, LGU, and PCW. For the second offense, doon sa classification A, di ba, parang 6 to 10 days lang siya. Dito, okay? Dito po, sa second offense, ang imprisonment mo na ay 11 to 30 days. Or a fine of 15,000 pesos. Kanina, di ba, ang fine mo 3,000 lang. Dito, pag second offense mo na, ang fine mo ay 15,000 pesos or ipapakulong ka ni judge ng 11 to 30 days. Pipili siya. Pag third offense na, mas mataas na po ang penalty mo. Kung kanina, 11 to 30 days lang, no? Dito po, ang third offense mo, imprisonment of 1 month and 1 day to 6 months and a fine of 20,000 pesos. So pag less serious na po yung ginawa mong GVSH in public places, ang iyo pong penalty ay mas mataas compared doon sa light offense. Okay? Yan. Now, may pangatlo po na klase pa ng crimes, no? Or ng acts of GVSH that you could commit in public places, no? Ito yung classification C. So ako, ang category, ang tawag ko dito is grave or grave offense or serious offense na po ng sexual harassment that you could commit in public places. Yan yung classification C. Ano nagpo-fall dito? Dito po nakapasok yung stalking and any acts mentioned in A and B, classification A and B, when accompanied by touching, pinching, or brushing against the body of the offended person. Okay, so for example, meron ka, nagpe-persistent telling ka ng sexual jokes. Di ba? Classification A yun. Persistent telling of sexual jokes. And then, you touch the body of the offended person. Yan. So, ibig sabihin, pwede na siyang pumasok sa classification C. Kasi ang sabi dito, any acts mentioned in A and B when accompanied by touching. Or, nagmamasturbate ka in public. Okay, that's under letter B. And then, you brush. Okay, nagmamasturbate kang ganun ba sa LRT. Tapos, you brush. Yung minamas, yung habang nagmamasturbate ka, binabrush mo to sa body ng offended person. That's considered already classification C. Okay, yun yung sinasabi dito. Okay? Ano pa? Any touching, pinching, or brushing against the genitalia, face, arms, anus, groin, breast, inner thighs, face, buttocks, or any part of the victim's body even when not accompanied by acts mentioned in A and B. So ito, any touching, pinching, or brushing, basta as long as itong mga body na to, itong parts ng body na to, ang iyo pong tinouch, pinitch, or binrush, considered po siya na classification C. So ang classic example nito, yung isang hinawakan ko pong kaso, sila po ay magkaklase, no? Tapos ang classroom nila is yung chatter type. So di ba pag sa chatter type, para dumaan ka, di ba pag may nakaupo sa first seat, doon sa chatter type, kailangan mong dumaan, papasok sa class, sa ano mo, sa seat mo. Yung ginawa po niya, instead na dumaan po siya patalikod, no? Dumaan po siya paharap. Tapos yung classmate niya na nakakipit yung dalawang tuhod para padaanin siya, ginamit niya po ang tuhod niya para i-part yung tuhod, no, yung tuhod po nung kanyang classmate, pinart po niya, okay, o pinaghiwalay niya po using po yung tuhod niya. So yung tuhod po niya nag-brush na po doon sa inner thigh nung kanyang classmate. So that is considered grave, no, or serious offense na po ng GVSH in public spaces or public places. Ma'am, bakit po public places? Classroom yun eh. Pinupuntahan ng public yun. Diba? That's part of the school. Yung chatter type nga lang yung classroom nila. So kaya po, kinasuhan po namin siya ng classification C or gender-based sexual harassment po na serious po or grave under this particular provision, yung touching or pinching or brushing against the inner thigh of the victim. Okay, victim offender po ng GVSH. Okay, so anong penalty nito? Dahil nga po serious siya, edi serious din po ang penalty nito. Okay, so sa first offense po, you can be imprisoned na po from 11 to 30 days or pwede ka pong ipag-fine ni judge ng 30,000 pesos provided na included po dito yung attendance mo sa GST to be conducted by PNP, LGU, and PCW. So for example, the judge said na, o sige, mag-fine ka na lang ng 30,000 pesos kasi first offense mo naman. Pero you have to attend pa rin po GST na i-conduct na po ng PNP, LGU, and PCW. Now, kung second offense na siya, pangalawang beses mo na kinumit yung serious, no? Or yung grave, no? Ikukulong ka po ng 1 month and 1 day to 6 months or pagpa-finein ka po ni judge ng 50,000 pesos. Okay? So again, nakay-judge na po kung pakukulong ka niya o pag-finein ka niya ng 50,000 pesos. Pero kung pangatlong offense mo po, well, of course, ikukulong ka na ng arresto mayor, 6 months na po yan, maximum period, or pagpa-finein ka po niya ng 100,000 pesos. So, wala kang pera, pakukulong ka na lang. And again, it depends on the judge kung ano po ibibigay na penalty sa inyo. Kung ikaw ay repeat offender, malamang papakulong ka na niya. O, di ba? Kasi repeat offender ka na, hindi ka natututo. Ayan, okay po. So yan po yung mga penalties, no, for committing gender-based sexual harassment in public places. Okay. So tandaan natin na paano kinukumit yun na dapat kinumit mo in public places. Meron kang unwanted, uninvited sexual action or remarks against a person and it threatens the personal space and safety of the victim survivor of the GVSH that you committed in public places. Okay? At nabanggit ko na po yung mga examples ng yung mga nagpo-fall under classification A, classification B, and classification C. Now, let's talk about gender-based online sexual harassment naman po. Okay. A question po sa atin pong chat box. Please answer yes or no. Pwede ka bang makasuhan ng online gender-based sexual harassment kung habang nasa webinar ka ay nag-send ka ng direct message sa isang participant at sinabi mong mukhang wala kang kasama dyan sa bahay mo. Puntahan kaya kita. Okay nga po? Yes or no? Pwede ka bang kasuhan? Okay? Ng online gender-based sexual harassment pag sinabi mo ito. Okay? Sa direct message, isang webinar. Ayan, okay? So, the poll ends now in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So marami po sa atin sumagot ng yes. Tama po ang inyong pong sagot. Yes, you can be charged of GBOSH, no? Or gender-based online sexual harassment or GBOSH. Ang tawag namin ito kasi haba eh. GBOSH yan. So paano ba kinukumit ang crime ng online gender-based sexual harassment? Okay. So ano yung ginawa mo? Gumamit ka ng information and communications technology sa pagsisend ng physical, psychological, and emotional threats. Kinumit mo ito saan? Online. Kung kanina, kinumit mo sa public places, ito, kinumit mo online. Anong naging epekto? Na-terrorize, na-intimidate yung victim, kaya naman na-threaten yung kanyang sense of personal space and physical safety. Okay, so yan po yung crime of gender-based online sexual harassment or GBOSH. So tatandaan natin, sa GBOSH, gumagamit ka ng information and communication technology. Kaya naman nakukumit mo to online. Pero the same din lang po yung effect niya. It terrorize, it intimidate the victim. Kaya po natitreaten na kanyang sense of personal space and physical safety. Sa example kanina doon sa hulaan, yung pinasagutan ko sa inyo kanina, it's technically a psychological threat, di ba? Yung sasabihan mo na wala ka pa ng kasama dyan sa bahay, puntahan kaya kita. That is a psychological threat. What? Why? Excuse me. Why is it a psychological threat? Because it intimidates the person. Diba? Natitreaten yung kanyang sense of personal space and physical safety. Sabihan mo ba naman na pupuntahan kita? Paano kung alam mo talaga yung bahay niya? Kasi magkaklase kayo. O kaya naman estudyante mo siya. O kaya naman estudyante mo siya. Professor, teacher, kunwari yung sinasabihan ng estudyante ng gano'n. Diba? So that could be considered po na GBOSH or part po siya noong pinipinalize ng ating pong crime of online sexual harassment or gender-based online sexual harassment. So ano yung mga acts covered ng GBOSH? Ito po yan. Physical, psychological, and emotional threats. Of course, in doing so, you use information communication technologies or you do this online. Okay? Unwanted sexual, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist remarks and comments online, whether publicly or through direct and private messages. So, halimbawa po, mag-PM ka sa kanya. Di ba? Piniem mo siya sa mo, hoy, bakla ka talaga, ang pangit-pangit mo. Ayan, piniem mo siya sa kanya pong Facebook, no, Messenger. Ayan, considered po yan na acts covered ng gender-based online sexual harassment. Or kaya naman, nag-post siya ng picture sa Facebook, nakasuot siya ng two-piece, sinabihan mo, hoy, bakla, ang pangit mo. Diba? Ang landi-landi mo dyan. O, diba yung mga ganun ang comment mo? Publicly yun na, nag-comment ka sa kanyang pinost. So that is considered GBOSH. Gender-based online sexual harassment.
Na lang kita ng tosino.
Kasi ang sabi po dito ay pwede siyang gawin publicly or through direct and private messaging. So halimbawa, habang nag-o-online tayo, di ba may DM tong ating Zoom. Doon ka nagsisend sa kanya ng direct message. That could also be considered na covered ng ating GBOSH. Ano pa? Invasion of privacy through cyberstalking and incessant messaging. So, yung message ka ng message sa kanya, kahit hindi kayo friends, tapos message ka ng message, di ba pagka hindi kayo friends sa Facebook, nare-receive mo pa rin yun, pumupunta siya sa spam ng messenger mo. So kung paulit-ulit siyang message, hindi mo naman siya sinasagot, no? Lagi mo na lang siya dinidelete, pero send pa rin siya ng send. That could be considered already as GBOSH. Kaya nga po sinasabi namin sa inyo, pagka ganyan, huwag nyo i-delete. I-keep nyo lang siya. Kasi hanggat hindi mo naman siya sinasagutan, hindi naman kayo magiging friends sa FB Messenger eh. At least yon, that is your proof, that is your evidence that there is incessant messaging or there is cyberstalking being done on you already. Okay? Ano pa? Uploading and sharing of any of the victim's photos, videos, or any information online. For example, yung classmate mong tulog, di ba? Nakabuka ka siya habang tulog. So, kumbaga yung kanyang posisyon what do you call this, hindi maganda yung itsura, no? Pagka-bulgar yung itsura niya kasi tulog nga siya. Pinicturean mo siya tapos pinost mo online. So that is considered na po as gender-based online sexual harassment. Okay? Ano pa? Impersonating identities of victims online or posting lies about victims to harm their reputation. Okay, sasabihin mo halimbawa na si bakla yan, di ba? So yung or si Tibuyan. Yan si Blanc, yan? Ano ba yung ACDC yan, di ba? Pwede sa babae, pwede sa lalaki. Yung mga ganun, sinisiraan mo siya. Nagpo-post ka ng lies about the person to harm their reputation. For example, the case of Darren Espanto and I forgot the name na naman to, kumanta sa ilalim ng buwan ba yun? Yan. I forgot the name of the, like ko nakakalimutan ang pangalan ng batang yon. Yun, yung ginawa niya, di ba, nag-post siya, I think nag-tweet siya na sinasabi niya bakla si Darren. That's why Darren filed a case against, I forgot the name of this child again, of the singer, no? Sa alam ko, tapos nung sa ilalim ng buwan, something, yun yung kinanta niya. I forgot yung name ng bata eh. Ayan, Juan Carlos, thank you very much for reminding mo. Si JK, ayan, okay, si JK, di ba? That's an example, no? I think nag-tweet siya na bakla si Darren. So, yun, isa yan sa kino-cover ng Givosh natin. Kasi you're posting something that can harm the reputation of the person. Or you file false abuse reports to online platforms to silence the victims. So, imbawa, nag-file ka ng false reports sa Facebook para yung Facebook i-close yung kanyang account. Diba? Kaya na-close ang account niya because of that particular false abuse reports, no? So pwede pong mag-qualify siya under ng Givosh, okay? So ano penalty ng Givosh? Imprisonment po with penalty of prison correctional in medium period, so that's 4 years. Or pwede po kayong i-fine of not less than 100,000 pesos, but not more than 500,000 pesos or both. So, pwede pong kulong or fine or sabihin ni judge, hindi, may kulong na, may fine pa na 100,000 pesos but not more than 500,000 pesos. So, mataas po ang penalty ng Givosh. Okay? Kung ang perpetrator po ay juridical person, automatic and license for a franchise niyan ay nare-revoke. Kung ang perpetrator po ay alien, meaning foreigner, deported po siya after serving sentence and payment of fines. Okay. So, saan mas magandang i-file mo yung Givosh mo? Patulong ka. Of course, pina-file po ang Givosh sa Fiscal's Office. Pero para po matulungan kayo na ma-firm up po yung mga evidences ninyo, you can go to the PNP Anti-Cybercrime Group. Kasi sila po yung primary responsible to receive complaints and to develop online mechanisms para po sa real-time reporting and apprehension. Pwede rin po sa NBI Anti-Cybercrime Division. They can help you po kasi retrieve yung mga text messages, yung mga messages po online, di ba? They can help you with the retrieval. Kaya po maganda, kung magpa-file po kayo ng Givosh, punta kayo sa PNP or sa NBI Anti-Cybercrime Group or Division para sila po ay mag-assist sa inyo ng filing ng case ninyo sa piskalya. Okay? They have the capacity or capability po to retrieve these particular messages po that are done online. Okay? Yan. So, pero ako, suggestion ko pa rin po sa inyo, pag may mga nare-receive po kayong ganyan o may mga post po sa inyo, screenshot nyo po siya agad. Okay? Screenshot nyo siya para po kung tanggalin man po yung, i-remove niya po man yung comment niya or yung kanyang message sa inyo, na screenshot nyo na po. So pagdating po sa PNP, may proof kayo na ito po, meron po talaga siya. So they can do something to retrieve it. Nare-retrieve po yan kasi anything that you post online is there online. It will forever be there. Anything that you download online will always be online. Okay? Hindi po nawawala yan online, mga kapatid. Kaya nga lagi namin sinasabi, when I talk to kids in schools, I keep on telling them, whatever you post online is always there. So please be careful on what you post online. Like for example, your pictures, di ba? Ngayon po, yung mga picture po natin na pinupost sa Facebook na nakatupis, pwede na po kayong hubaran. Di ba? May mga nag-grab po niyan. Hindi nyo lang alam, marami pong mga perpetrators, no? Sa online na pwede i-grab ang picture nyo, hubaran na kayo at gamitin na po siya sa mga phonographic materials. So kaya nga tama po yung sinasabi lagi ng Channel 7, think before you click. Meaning anything that you will post online, pag-isipan nyo muna po. Okay, kung ipopost nyo online. Maraming instances po nag-grab yung mga photos po na mga nakatupis, naka-swimsuit, or very daring yung mga itsura nila, tapos ginagamit na po for phonographic materials. Okay? Because anything that's there will remain there. Parang ano lang, sabi nga po ng isang friend ko sa cybercrime yun daw pong nakikita lang natin online is that only the tip of the iceberg. Mas marami pa po nasa ilalim, nasa deep web na tinatawag niya. Okay? So you have to be very careful na on what you post online. And also, kung mga anak kayo, tingnan nyo rin po yung kanilang mga pinagpo-post online o kanilang tinitingnan online. Okay? Yan. Marami pong online predator sa tinatawag. Okay, now, if you commit po or if you if the following circumstances, for instances, when you committed gender-based sexual harassment in street and public places and online are present, itong mga circumstances na to, ang penalty po next higher in degree shall always be applied sa inyong kaso. Okay, ano po yung mga circumstances that will make or will aggravate po the crime of GBSH in streets and public places and online? Ito po yung mga different circumstances or attending circumstances. Una, penalty next higher in degree is applied if the sexual harassment in streets and public spaces and online takes place in a common carrier or PUB, and where the perpetrator is the driver of the vehicle and the offended party is a passenger. So automatic, lagi pong qualified pagka po nangyari po ang harassment sa mga common carrier or PUB tapos ang perpetrator ay driver. Lagi din pong qualified kapag ka pong offended party ay minor, senior citizen, or person with disability, or a breastfeeding mother nursing her child. Lagi din pong penalty next higher in degree i-apply kapag ang offended party po is diagnosed with a mental problem tending to impair consent. Or, ang perpetrator po ay member ng PNP, AFP, at yung act po ay pinerpetuate niya while he or she is in uniform. For example, a police officer. Naka-uniform siya, tapos she harasses, no? Or he harasses a woman on the street. So that's the automatic po, ang penalty next higher degree po ang ibibigay sa kanya kapag siya ay na-convict. Bakit? Kasi member po siya ng PNP. Diba? Member po siya ng AFP, and they're supposed to protect the state and its constituents, diba? Not to abuse them. At penalty next higher degree din po ang i-apply if the act or the harassment takes place in the premises of a government agency offering frontline services to the public and the perpetrator is a government employee. Why? Because public office is a public trust, di ba? Dapat nga ikaw yung nagpapakita pa at role model pa ng kagandahang asal. Hindi ikaw yung nambabastos. Okay po? So kaya po pagka attendant po or present po yung mga circumstances na yan, the penalty next higher in degree will always be applied by the court. Okay. Ano yung pangatlong type ng sexual harassment penalized under the law? Ito po yung tinatawag ng gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace naman po. So paano nangyayari po yung harassment in the workplace? But of course, first we need to define what is a workplace. So pag sinabing workplace, it includes all sites, locations, spaces where work is being undertaken by the employee within or outside the premises of the usual place of the business of the employer. So yan po yung definition ng workplace ng atin pong batas. Okay, so kung titingnan mo, basta na kahit nasaan kayo, as long as you are there because of work, that particular place is considered a workplace. Okay? So how is the crime of GBSH in the workplace committed? Ayan. So kinakailangan po, again, titingnan mo, ano yung ginawa, ano yung modes of committing, ano yung epekto niya. Okay. Anong ginawa? Meron siyang act or series of acts that is sexual in nature, that is unwelcome, unreasonable, offensive, and pervasive. Okay? So tandaan mo ha, yung act or series of acts niya ay sexual in nature, tapos unwelcome, unreasonable, offensive, and or pervasive. Paano ginawa? Pwede pong verbally, physically, or through the use of information and communication technology. Okay? Anong naging epekto? Tatlo. Pwedeng it resulted to conditions that are detrimental to one's employment, job performance, or opportunities. Or kaya naman po, it affected the dignity of a person, or it created an intimidating, hostile, or humiliating environment for the recipient. So yun po yung epekto ng iyong GBSH na kinumit in the workplace. O yun po yung epekto ng act or series of acts mo that is sexual in nature, unwelcome, offensive, unreasonable, or pervasive, which you committed in the workplace. Okay? So ano pong bago dito sa batas natin? Well, ang bago po dito is in workplace harassment po, pwede na po siyang i-commit between peers. So hindi na po elemento yung moral ascendancy, authority, and influence. It's no longer a primary element in the crime of gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace, because hierarchical relationship is no longer an element of GBSH in the workplace. Kaya nga po, it can be committed between peers, it could be committed by a subordinate to a superior officer, meaning it's the employee doing the harassment to the boss. Okay, yan. So, yun po yung ibig sabihin ng subordinate to a superior officer or someone who is holding a lower position than the victim. So, anong bago pa po dito? Well, technically po, highlight na po dito yung duties ng employers. Pagdating po sa supil, no? O pagsugpo po ng gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace. So dito po sinasabi na duty ng employer na mag-disseminate or mag-post in conspicuous places copies po ng batas. So pag sinabing conspicuous places, dapat ito po yung nakikita talaga ng mga empleyado at ito ilalagay mo dun sa lugar kung saan lagi nagko-congregate o laging nandudoon yung mga empleyado. Okay. Ano pa yung duty ng employer? Kailangan mag-provide po siya ng measures to prevent gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace. Paano niya gagawin yan? Kinakailangan pong i-train niya yung kanyang mga tao on gender sensitivity, on gender-based violence, on sexual harassment, and other related topics. Or kaya naman po, kinakailangan pwede pong isama na niya o kinakailangan isama niya na po yung usapin ng GVSH, no? Doon sa mga training and orientations po na parte po ng staff development and basic knowledge ng mga empleyado. Kinakailangan din daw po mag-create ng independent internal mechanism or CODI to investigate, address complaints, mag-develop po no, ng mga workplace code of conduct or workplace policy na kung saan nakapaloob po yung mga procedures of internal mechanisms and admin penalties. At i-ensure po na yung mga empleyado daw po na naka-experience ng GVSH in the workplace ay binibigyan po ng assistance. No? By virtue po na ito'y nakasulat sa mga company policies natin at sinusupervise po ng CODI and or human resources. So yan po yung duties ng employers. Bago po yan. Ano yung bago pa na pinaloob po ng batas sa atin pong RA 11313, no? Pagdating po sa GVSH. Dito po maliwanag na kung ano yung liability ng employers. So yung mga employers po pwede kayong kasuhan and upon conviction po, ito yung mga penalties ninyo. Pwede po kayong magbayad ng 5,000 pesos but not more than 10,000 pesos kung yung mga duties po na pinakita ko sa inyo kanina, hindi nyo po in-implement. Okay? Pwede rin po kayong magbayad ng 10,000 pesos no more than 15,000 pesos kung hindi po kayo nag-take action on reported acts of GVSH committed in the workplace. Yan po yung penalties ng mga employers. So yung mga present po natin dito, mga staff, no? Or yung mga nakikinig po from the communities na sila po ay nagtatrabaho, ito po yung pwede pong maging penalty ng mga employers ninyo kung hindi po nila ginagawa yung kanilang responsibility under the law. Okay. So yung mga co-workers din po at saka mga employees, meron din po kayong duty under the new provisions in the law. Ano po yung mga duties natin? You have to refrain from committing acts of GVSH in the workplace. You have to discourage the conduct of GVSH in the workplace. You have to provide emotional support, no? Or social support to your fellow employees, colleagues, or peers who are victims of GVSH. And you have to report acts of GVSH that you witness in the workplace. So very important yung reporting. Bakit po? Because the law encourages all people to take a stand, no? And to help victim survivors of gender-based sexual harassment. So, dinidiscourage na po ng batas natin yung bystanders. Ano yung bystanders? Yung nakikita mo may hinaharas na wala kang ginagawa. That's why the law allows reporting. So, kung naka-witness ka, i-report mo sa appropriate authorities or sa proper authorities yung ginagawang harassment dun sa kasamahan mo. Okay. So ano yung pang-apat, no? Yung last na harassment po penalized under the law. Ito po yung GVSH in educational and training institution. So paano naman to nakukumit? Yung GVSH in education and training institution. Paano nakukumit ang GVSH sa ating campus? Ayan, titingnan mo, sino bang offender? Okay? Ang offender dito po would be a teacher, instructor, professor, tutor, trainer, or, okay po, yung peer ninyo o yung estudyante. So sa atin pong bagong batas, wala na rin po yung hierarchy. So Sino pwede maging perpetrator ng GVSH in Education Training Institution? A teacher, instructor, professor, coach, or trainer. At mamaya papakita ko yung bagong insertion sa batas natin. Pwede na pong makomit din siya by the peers, by your peers, or by a student or trainee to a teacher or trainer. Okay, so sinong biktima? One who is under the care, custody, or supervision of the offender. Kung halimbawa ang perpetrator po ay yung teacher, instructor, professor, coach, or trainee, or one whose education, training, apprenticeship, or tutorship is entrusted to the offender. So paano ang pag-commit? May dalawang modes po of committing, no? Number one, there is a demand, request, or requirement for any sexual favor. So this provision is copied from the old law, yung ating pong RA 7877. So there is demand, request, or requirement for any sexual favor. Okay. So saan ginamit yung request, requirement, or demand for sexual favor? Ginamit tong kondisyon para bigyan ka ng passing grade, para bigyan ka or i-grant ka ng honors and scholarship, or para bayaran yung stipend, allowance, or other benefits or privileges ng estudyante. So yun ha. So tandaan natin, meron po DRR, demand, request, or requirement, at ginamit to as condition for giving of passing grade, granting of honors and scholarship, or payment of stipend, allowance, or other benefits or privileges. That's the first mode of committing GVSH in the educational and training institution. The second mode is, when the act already results in an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. For example, yung parati ka nalang sinisipulan, hinihipuan, binabrush ang katawan niya sa katawan mo, like ka lang niyang ginugrope. At itong mga acts na to, nagre-result na po sa intimidating, hostile, or offensive na environment doon po sa biktima or survivor. So hindi, ayaw na niyang pumasok. Kasi every time makikita ka niya, natatakot siya na aakapin mo siya or hihipuan mo siya. So offensive na po, intimidating, hostile na po yung environment. So that could also be that could also happen, and that is also a mode of committing GVSH in educational and training institutions. So tatandaan natin na how committed. Okay? So offender is a teacher, instructor, professor, coach, or trainer. The victim is one who is under the care, custody, or supervision of the offender, or one whose education, training, apprenticeship, or tutorship is entrusted to the offender. And these are the modes of committing. And this is copied from the old law. Okay, now remember, since the school is considered a public place under the definition of the law, yung acts of GVSH po committed against the student, the trainee, the apprentice, and the tutor is also sanctioned or will also be sanctioned in accordance with the penalties mentioned under the crime of GVSH in streets and public places if you will file a case in court. Okay, kung magpa-file ka ng criminal case. So, pwedeng i-sanction pa rin siya noong atin pong mga penalties under sa GVSH committed in public places. Yung classification A, B, and C. Okay? Anong bago? Again, dito po sa ating batas, tinanggal na rin po yung hierarchical relationship pagdating po doon sa harassment committed in educational and training institutions. So, meaning, the GVSH in education training institutions can also be committed between peers and by the student to a teacher or by a trainee to a trainer. Okay? So anong bago din po? Maliwanag na po dito kung anong liabilities ng school heads and heads of training institutions. Sa lumang batas kasi hindi po maliwanag yung liability. But now, if the school head and head of training institutions failed, to implement their duties as required or provided under the law, upon conviction, they will be meted a penalty of fine of not less than 5,000 pesos but not more than 10,000 pesos. Or if they fail to act on reported acts of GVSH that are committed in educational institution, upon conviction, they will be meted with a penalty of fine of not less than 10,000 pesos but not more than 15,000 pesos. So kita niyo may penalty at and upon conviction to, so ibig sabihin criminal case to kasi upon conviction. O kaya na mga penalty ibibigay sa mga school heads and heads of training institutions kung hindi po nila gawin yung kanilang duties and responsibilities. Now, ano ba yung other requirements for educational training institutions? Ano yung other duties mo other than doon sa mga nakasulat kanina? Una, you have to assign an officer or a person readily accessible to receive complaints of GVSH. Meron ba kayo niyan sa eskwelahan niyo? Okay? Dapat merong assign. na itong taong to ang pupuntahan ng estudyante kapag biktima siya ng sexual harassment. Siya yung magre-receive ng complaints for GVSH in educational and training institutions. Now, itong officer na to, i-ensure na dapat na ang complaint will be processed in a manner that is most efficient and convenient to the complainant. So, kinakailangan po gender sensitive yung atin pong officer na magre-receive ng complaint. Kasi nga sabi, ipaprocess mo siya doon sa manner na convenient and efficient para sa complainant. So, dapat yung complainant hindi siya ma-victimize, hindi siya matotrauma dahil nag-file siya ng complaint. Okay? So, dapat gender sensitive yung officer. And then the officer must determine if the complainant needs immediate assistance, such as counseling and or medical services. For example, if nakita niya takot-takot yung biktima, yung estudyante, takot-takot siya, kinakailangan po bigyan siya ng immediate critical incident and stress debriefing. So part yun, dapat na ibibigay mong immediate assistance. Or kung meron siyang sugat or something like that, kinakailangan dalahin mo siya sa ospital. So you have to determine, no? And then you have to forward the case to the Committee on Decorum and Investigation within 48 hours from receipt. So ang trabaho ni officer, tanggapin yung complaint, kunin yung mga detalye, tingnan kung anong pangangailangan ng biktima or ng complainant, and then within 48 hours, i-forward niya sa CODI. So, importante po na ang eskwelahan natin, meron siyang Committee on Decorum and Investigation. Okay? So, hindi naman automatic pupunta sa CODI, but of course, pupunta ka muna sa officer. The officer will assist and then forward the case to the CODI. Okay? So, remember, the assigned officer must be knowledgeable about gender-based violence, such as sexual harassment, mental health, counseling, and other relevant knowledge and skills in handling the subject. So very important po na well-versed, no, sa usapin ng gender-based violence ang ating pong i-assign na officer na magre-receive readily ng mga complaints of GVSH. At kinakailangang i-ensure po ang confidentiality in the process of accepting complaint. So ang tanong, meron na ba kayong ganitong proseso? Pari may CODI kayo, but baka wala pa kayong naka-assign na officer, you have to comply because this is one of the requirements of the law. Okay? Other requirements pa, you have to support the parties involved in GVSH related court proceedings. So for example, if the student decided to file a case against the perpetrator, you have to give due consideration sa kanya na mag-attend ng mga court-related proceedings. Okay? Kung halimbawa, meron siyang may activity, tas may court hearing, pwede mo siyang i-excuse dun sa activity. I-excuse mo yung kanyang absences from classes kapag kinakailangan niya mag-attend ng court hearings because nag-file siya ng criminal case against the perpetrator ng harassment or sa perpetrator na nag-commit ng harassment sa kanya. So this should be part of the policy of the school. So isasama niyo siya sa handbook. Okay? And then of course, like what I've said kanina, dapat meron po kayong code of conduct, no? For workplace and education training institutions. Na dito po sa ating code of conduct, naka-define ano yung gender-based sexual harassment, ano yung kino-cover niya, ano yung mga forms niya, classifications, at ano yung appropriate penalties, at kailan saan to pwedeng i-commit. Okay? Nakalagay din dapat sa code of conduct yung mga procedures in filing cases. Okay? Ano yung rules and procedures in case po na merong request for inhibition sa any of the members of the CODI. Ano yung functions, responsibilities, composition, and qualifications po ng CODI members. At kung hindi po magtrabaho yung CODI members, ano po yung penalties na pwedeng i-impose sa kanila. Nakapaloob din dapat po sa Code of Conduct, ano po yung mga trainings that the CODI members needs to undergo, and what are the support services that you are going to provide to the victims of gender-based sexual harassment. So all of this has to be included or incorporated in the Code of Conduct for workplace and educational and training institutions. Okay, now we talk about the CODI. Ano ba yung CODI? Okay, or the Committee on Decorum and Investigation. Anong composition yan? Sa workplace, dapat daw po adequately represent the management, the employees, from the supervisory rank, the rank and file employees, and the union if any. For educational institution, at least one rep daw po from the school administration, from the trainers, instructors, professors, or coaches and students or trainers, students and parents as the case may be. So meaning, kinakailangan represented po ang estudyante, represented din po ang parents. doon sa inyong Committee on Decorum and Investigation. So sa TIA, pag nagawa kayo ng CODI, kinakailangan po may representation ang parents at saka estudyante. Okay? So, the head of training institution may include other groups in the CODI as may be applicable. If there are other groups that you need to include, pwede po yung idagdag. Okay? Tapos, you have to ensure representations of persons with diverse SOGI as far as practicable. Anong ibig sabihin nun? I-ensure po na merong member ng doon sa CODI po na nakakaintindi po or represented po yung ating mga sexual, yung SOGI natin, yung sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, no? So yung mga members po ng LGBTQIA+ community kinakailangan represented din po sa CODI natin sa ating educational institution. And then kinakailangan daw po merong permanent alternate in case of absence of the regular member kasi the alternate will be the one to vote para po sa kanya. Okay? And this alternate should have the authority to render decision. Of course, magboboto kayo, di dapat meron ka ding authority to render decision. Yan po yung ating composition ng CODI sa eskwelahan. Tandaan natin dapat po hindi lang po yung mga teachers and school administrations ang represented. Dapat andun din po yung estudyante, andun din po yung parent. At kung kinakailangan po may isama pa tayong iba na mga grupo, pwede po nating isama. Okay? At dapat po equally represented po yung LGBTQIA++ community sa atin pong CODI. Okay, question. Ang head ba ng CODI dapat babae? Sige nga po, ang tanong po. Ang head ba ng CODI dapat po babae? Ano pong sagot natin? Okay, dapat po ang head ng CODI, sabi ng batas, ay female. Okay, so the head of the CODI should be a female and not less than half of the members of the CODI should be women. So ito po yung composition ng members ng ating CODI. Okay? And then kinakailangan daw po yung ating members ng CODI impartial, not connected or related to the alleged perpetrator within the 4th degree of consanguinity or affinity. Wala po siyang prior record or involvement as respondent, defendant, or accused in any case of whatever nature of sexual harassment. Okay? So kung siya ay dating naakusahan na ng sexual harassment, hindi na siya pwede maging member ng CODI. Anong function ng CODI? Ayan, they have to investigate and decide on the complaint within 10 days or less upon receipt of the complaint. They have to observe due process, they have to protect the complainant from retaliation, and they have to guarantee gender-sensitive handling of complaints and confidentiality of the identity of the parties and the proceedings to the greatest extent possible. So yan po yung trabaho ng CODI. So yung mga complaint po dapat within 10 days tapos. Okay? Remember, kung ang CODI po ninyo hindi nagtrabaho, pwede po siyang makasuhan under the Code of Conduct na i-develop po ng inyong organization or institution. Prescriptive period po ng GVSH for offenses under classification A, 1 year po ang prescriptive period, meaning may 1 taon ka para mag-file ng case. Okay? Yung offenses po under classification B, 3 years po yon. Under classification C, 10 years. Yung pong online sexual harassment, imprescriptible po yan. Ibig sabihin, hindi po nagpe-prescribe. Anytime pwede nyo i-file. Yung pong mga offenses na committed in workplace and in educational and training institution, ang prescriptive period po niya ay 5 years. Okay? Now, other salient provisions. Binabanggit po sa batas na dapat daw po ang investigation is always confidential. Okay? Plus, there's a remedy po provided by law na kung ikaw ay nag-file ng kaso in court, tapos gusto mong i-protect ang sarili mo from the harasser, pwede ka po mag-file ng restraining order. So pagka po ginant ng court yung restraining order, yung pong perpetrator mo, kung nasa isang campus lang kayo, kinakailangan pong hindi, siya po ay lumayo sa'yo. Okay? Na at a distance to be specified by the court. Okay? Or kaya naman po, huwag siyang mag-frequent doon sa place na lagi mo pinupuntahan din. So pwedeng i-restrain, nalapitan ka. Pero ito po dapat may file case in court ka. Okay? So yung restraining order, ma-apply mo yan if there's a pending case in court. You file the case in court and then you requested the court to give this particular remedy to you. Okay? Ano pa yung other important provisions in the law? The victim survivors of GVSH will needs to be provided with psychological counseling. So pwede pong tulungan sila ng local government unit or the DSWD. Now, kung siya po ay nag-seek ng private na treatment, no, or medical assistance, at siya po ay gumastos, yung pong kanyang ginastos, pwede niya pong singilin dun sa perpetrator ng GVSH. Now, tandaan natin, kahit na po na-discharge siya or na-dismiss siya sa inyong sa trabaho niya, sa eskwelahan, pwede pa rin po siyang kasuhan criminally. Okay? So, things to remember when you're a victim of sexual harassment. Tandaan natin, pag biktima ka po ng sexual harassment, very important po na una, you have to get the message across. Don't expect anyone to read your mind. So, anong ibig sabihin nun? If you experience harassment, you have to tell the person, hoy, nakakaharas ka na. Hindi tama yung ginagawa mo. Okay? Kasi halimbawa, nag-joke ng green. Sabihan mo, oy, hindi na tama yung joke mo. Green na yan, double meaning yan. Sexually harassing yan, ha? Pero kung persistently nag-joke pa rin siya ng green, mag-qualify na po yung crime of GVSH in public places kung ginawa niya sa eskwelahan niya. Okay po? Number 2, document. It's very important that you document the harassment, you document the negative actions, you document your school performance or work performance. Bakit po importante ang documentation? Kasi magagamit mo itong evidence later on when you bring your case to court, or even in admin cases when you bring your case before the CODI. Magagamit mo po ito. Kaya lagi ko sinasabi sa inyo, kung nag-text sa inyo, nag-message sa inyo, screenshot nyo po. Para just in case burahin niya o i-remove niya as unsent, di ba? Meron po kayong proof na pwedeng dalahin sa PNP Cybercrime Group or NBI Cybercrime Division as proof talaga na nag-commit ng online sexual harassment ng tao. And then lastly, of course, you have to file a complaint. So paano mag-file ng complaint? These are the things you need to consider. Number 1, okay, begin with available grievance channels. So kung merong CODI sa eskwelahan natin, doon tayo mag-start, no? And then you have to remember that there is power in numbers. Anong ibig sabihin ng power in numbers? Kung may mga other victims po ng harassment, pwede niyo po silang kausapin para sabay-sabay kayo mag-file against the person. Mas maganda po yung marami ang naka-experience ng harassment sa kanya. You have to document retaliation like what I have said kanina kasi gagamitin mo yan when you file formal complaints. You have to keep notes of meetings and phone conferences. Or kung halimbawa naka-experience ka na ng harassment sa kanya before while she or he is calling you, i-record mo na yung susunod yung conversation. Okay? Stay composed and consult with a legal advocate. Okay. Check on learnings lang po and understanding. Very few questions on our pop quiz. 3 questions lang po. Kindly use po yung ating chat box in answering the questions. Okay? Number 1. Sasagutan lang po natin yes or no, ha? RA 11313 is known as a Safe Spaces Act. Yes or no? Is RA 11313 known as a Safe Spaces Act? Yes or no? Kindly type your answer po in the chat box if it's yes or no. Para ma-check ko lang po kung may natandaan kayo sa discuss natin. Okay. So marami po sumagot ng yes. Tama po ang sagot nyo. RA 11313 po is known as a Safe Spaces Act. Okay. Number 2. RA 11313 does not penalize online sexual harassment. Yes or no? RA 11313 does not penalize online sexual harassment. Okay po. The poll will now end in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. The correct answer po is no. Yeah, no po. Hindi, because RA 11313 penalized online sexual harassment. Last number. RA 11313 was enacted in 1995. Yes or no? Binanggit ko yan kanina, di ba? Ano po? Yes or no? Okay. Ayan. So the correct answer po is no. It was enacted in 2017. Okay? Ayan. So maraming salamat po. You learned something, no, from our discussion. So tandaan natin, no, in RA 11313 requires reporting of what you witness, no? Like for example, if you witness someone being harassed, you have to report it. Why is it important that you report? Because we have to always remember that we need to do something to end harassment and to end violations perpetrated against those people na wala po talagang power. O, di ba? Yung kokonti po yung hinuhold nilang power or tingin nila kokonti ang hinuhold nilang power. Okay? So we always have to be reminded of this statement in the film North Country. What are we supposed to do when those with power are hurting those with none? So kaya isa pong napakagandang provision dito po sa RA 11313 is yung pong pag-encourage na makialam tayo, no? At pag-discourage po na maging bystander tayo, yung meaning nanonood ka lang parati. Because sabi nga po ni Elie Wiesel, no, what hurt the victims most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. So always remember that as humans, no, we have to take a stand, and we have to help those people who have less power, no, or who cannot bring their concerns up front, no. So kinakailangan po tulungan natin sila na mawala po yung pagiging biktima nila o matulungan po na mabigay yung justice po that they deserve. Okay? With that po, maraming salamat po for listening, and I hope you learned something from my lecture this morning. Thank you!
Ayan, maraming salamat po, Attorney Mylen. So ano lang po, no, ilang takeaways lang din po from the discussion po ni Attorney. So kanina diniscuss po yung RA 11313 po, no, or yung tinatawag natin bawal ang bastos law or the Safe Spaces Act. Ito po ay pinalinaw at pinatibay na batas based on the RA 7877. No? Mas malawak na yung coverage niya kasi unlike before na pang educational and workplace lang po yung coverage yung batas. Ngayon kasama na yung natin o yung public environment natin. Physical man yan o kaya virtual. So kasama din po yung online. Tapos kanina hinighlight din po ni Attorney na ang coverage na rin po ng batas na to ay lahat na ng human beings po. So kanina although yung data na present po ay mas nakafocus sa kababaihan kasi mas common pa rin nga. We cannot deny na mas common sa kababaihan yung harassment na nararanasan, no? Pero dito sa batas na to, lahat na po ng genders ay pwedeng maproteksyonan. So sinasabi rin kanina na threefold po ang liabilities ng RA 11313, civil, criminal, and administrative. So kailangan talaga natin na paunti-unti nang baguhin yung mga perspectives and practices natin when it comes to interacting people and dealing with harassment kasi talagang mabibigat yung consequences. Tapos, ayun, I also appreciate din po pala yung method ni Attorney to engage our participants kasi mostly composed po tayo ng mga estudyante ng Trinity University of Asia. Tapos, gamit yung mga situations at saka yung mga pop quiz ni Attorney, we can easily understand and identify the classification ng GBSH. At syempre ganun din yung mga kasamahan natin ngayon dito na empleyado din po ng TUA, lalo na yung mga kasamahan natin na guro at kawani. Meron din po tayong protection. Ginagabayan din po tayo kung paano natin mas ma-maximize yung batas. So thank you po Attorney Mylen for your presentation po for discussing the bawal ang bastos. So ayun I'm sorry. Okay, going back. Our learning session for today po talaga speaks in volumes. Kung meron po tayong mga questions, clarifications, or possible, makakuha din po tayo ng mga advices from our resource persons kung paano natin mas ma-maximize yung mga batas na i-discuss natin. We can share po later on sa ating open forum. So, ngayon po, let us proceed po with our next topic. It is also a privilege again to introduce our next resource person. So our next resource person is an alumnus of TUA, finishing his undergraduate studies at the St. Luke's College of Nursing in 2009, and now a practicing lawyer after obtaining his Bachelor of Laws at the San Beda, Manila in 2017. While furthering his expertise on law at the Ateneo de Manila University, he is also the Legal and Compliance Manager at Skylark Corporation in Mandaluyong, to which he is affiliated since November 2018. He is also a project attorney of the Integration Managed Solution Incorporated since August 2019 and currently a faculty member of the College of Law of New Era University in Quezon City. Now to discuss our second topic on anti-bullying in the campus, please welcome Attorney Ron Oliver H. Gamboa. Good morning po, Attorney.
Good morning, ma'am. Sorry, nakamute pala ako. Okay. Can you see my slide, ma'am?
Not yet po, sir.
Here, ma'am. Yan po.
Yeah. Okay na po, Attorney. Thank you po.
Okay, so for today, I'll be discussing about Republic Act 10627, also known as the Anti-Bullying Act of 2013. The complete title of this particular law is an act requiring all elementary and secondary schools to adopt policies to prevent and address the facts of bullying in their institutions. So from the title itself, you could actually know na kung ano yung jurisdiction ng kaso, kung ano yung nakapaloob dun sa batas. So it says here that all elementary and secondary schools, what do they have to do? To adopt policies to prevent and address the acts of bullying in their institution. So first question, are college students under this particular law? The answer is no. Okay, because as we mentioned, it only covers elementary and secondary schools. Second question, are college students not protected for any act of bullying? The answer is they are protected, but not with this particular law, because we have other laws that could actually cover the essence of Anti-Bullying Act. But for this particular act, we'll be focusing on how should schools, particularly elementary and secondary, should adopt policies to prevent and address the acts of bullying. Brief history of the law. It was actually one of the Senator Edgardo Sonny Angara as one of the principal authors of RA 10627 or the Anti-Bullying Act of 2013. According to him, a study was conducted by Plan International and UNICEF on violence against children in public schools in the Philippines in 2009. It revealed that 4 out of 10 children in grades 1 to 3 and 7 out of 10 in both grades 4 to 6 and high school have experienced some kind of violence in school. The said law was later approved by the late President Benigno S. Aquino on September 12, 2013. So this law was enacted 2013, so about for 10 years na. Unlike the previous law discussed, this is relatively short. It only have 10 provisions or sections, but we'll be focusing more on how should schools, elementary and secondary, should adopt policies to promote anti-bullying. An article in December 14, 2019 states that 6 in 10 Pinoy teens are bullied in school as a study. And also, I think you're quite familiar on what happened on December 2018, where in a viral high school bullying video, Where is the Philippines? If you could recall, I think this was the same video that happened in a school in Katipunan, wherein it was caught in the act, the bully on how he actually bullied the victim. Also, is your child a victim of bullying by Attorney Tranquil G. S. Salvador, an article published on November 13, 2020, which also tackles the same law that we'll be discussing today. So what is bullying? The definition of bullying is, this definition is particularly what is stated in the said law, RA 10627, So this is not the exclusive definition of bullying. This is just how the law defines bullying. For the purposes of this act, it says that bullying shall refer to any severe or reported use by one or more students of a written, verbal, or electronic expression, or a physical act or gesture, or any combination thereof, directed at another student that has the effect of actually causing or placing the latter in reasonable fear of physical or emotional harm or damage to his property, creating a hostile environment at school for the other students, infringing on the rights of the other student at school, or materially and substantially disrupting the education process or the orderly operation of a school, such as but limited to the following acts. But before we proceed to the next slide, I highlighted who are the participants in the definition of bullying of RA 10627. It says here as a perpetrator, one or more students, and the victim is another student. So question, what if the perpetrator or the bully is the teacher and the victim is a student? Is it covered by this particular act? The question again is no. Okay, but is the student protected by any other laws that entails bullying? The answer is yes. As I mentioned, as I'm repeating, this particular act is directed towards the institution to adopt policies on anti-bullying. Hence, the definition of bullying in this particular law entails students, between students. But kung sakali, and it's actually very uncommon naman na teacher yung bully, pero in rare instances, when the teacher is the bully and the victim is the student, we have other laws that could actually protect the victim or the student. We'll try to run down those few laws regarding that one. So these are the enumerated acts of bullying in RA 10627. First, any unwanted physical contact between the bully and the victim, like punching, pushing, shoving, kicking, slapping, tickling, headlocks, inflicting school pranks, teasing, fighting, and the use of available objects as weapon. So the first enumeration entails more of physical contact. But if you could actually notice, on the first enumeration, it stated inflicting school pranks. Nowadays, you could actually see in YouTube and all social media that very rampant na rin yung school prank. Diba? Sometimes it's quite offensive na dun sa pinaprank. Question, yung nag-prank, can they make it as a defense that they have no intention to bully yung prank nila for them not to be liable for the violation of this particular law? The answer is no. Why? It's because intention is immaterial in special laws. So the fact that you violated RA 10627 as you committed an act in violation of the first enumeration on how you commit bullying, you cannot use the defense of good faith or no intention to harm the bully for you not to be liable, the victim for you not to be liable in this particular act. So since this is a special law, intention is not material. So kung may intention ka ba talaga na i-bully siya or wala ka namang intention i-bully siya tapos gumawa ka ng prank but it turned out you offended the victim, you can still be held liable with this particular act. Second enumeration, any act that causes damage to a victim's physique and or emotional well-being. Third, any slanderous statement or accusation that causes the victim undue emotional distress, like directing foul language or profanity at the target, name-calling, tormenting, commenting negatively on victims' looks, clothes, and body. So laging sinasabi, or a common defense between bullies is just they're actually just expressing or exercising their freedom of expression. Remember that slanderous statement, the Constitution, our Constitution does not provide protection to slanderous statement. Yes, our Constitution is actually fighting for the freedom of speech and expression, but keep in mind that slander, libel, or any other form of crime is not protected by the Constitution. So what's the difference pala between slander and libel? Slander is a spoken false accusation, while libel, it's more of the written. So that's the difference between the two. Fourth act, cyberbullying or any bullying done through the use of technology or any electronic means. So this is very rampant as well nowadays, since we are in the era na everything is hyped by the technology. And aside from this particular act, we also have the Cybercrime Act, which we will pass through later. So it's actually included in RA 10627, those acts that constitute cyberbullying. So what do the schools need to do, all right, to actually manifest the spirit of the law in protecting the students? The school should actually adopt anti-bullying policies. According to the said law, all elementary and secondary schools are hereby directed to adopt policies to address the existence of bullying in the respective institutions. First, the Prohibition of Bullying Acts. As we mentioned, bullying acts as defined in the first few slides, it's the act between students, one or more student to another student. So kung yung acts is between a teacher or a student, it is not covered by this particular law. Second, identify the range of disciplinary and administrative actions that may be taken against a perpetrator for bullying or retaliation which shall be commensurate with the nature and gravity of the offense. Third, establish clear procedures and strategies. Fourth, enable students to anonymously report bullying or retaliation, provided, however, that no disciplinary administrative action shall be taken against a perpetrator solely on the basis of anonymous report. So here, from the fourth enumeration on the adoption of anti-bullying policies, of course, to exercise due process,
So, maganda naman yung
for the alleged perpetrator, okay, anonymous report should not be entertained, or there should no disciplinary administrative sanction to be taken against the perpetrator based on anonymous report. Although the identities of the perpetrator and the victim in bullying in this particular act, it is actually expected upon the schools or the institutions that the identities of the perpetrator and the victim should be treated with utmost confidentiality. Next, subject a student who knowingly makes a false accusation of bullying to disciplinary administrative action. Educate students on the dynamics of bullying, the anti-bullying policies of the school, as well as the mechanisms of such school for the anonymous reporting of acts of bullying or retaliation. Also, it is included to educate the parents and guardians about the dynamics of bullying, the anti-bullying policies of the school, and how parents and guardians can provide support and reinforce such policies at home and maintain a public record of relevant information and statistics on acts of bullying or retaliation in school. RA 10627 actually gives the institution, elementary and secondary, the leeway to adopt their policies. It actually does not mandate what should be the policy be, like how would it flow. However, these are the guidelines on what should be included in the policies that to be adopted by the institutions. So these enumerations from A to H, these are the policies that should be reflected, or these are the content that should be reflected in the policies to be created by the institutions. So what are the mechanisms to address bullying? The school principal or any person who holds a comparable role shall be responsible for the implementation and oversight of policies intended to address bullying. So first, you notify the law enforcement agency if the school principal or the signee believes that criminal charges under the revised penal code may be pursued against the perpetrator. Keep in mind, it's actually a basic concept in law that a single act may constitute or may arise to a different causes of action. So for example, a certain act of bullying can be a violation of 10627. It can also be a claim for damages as a civil case. It can also be a criminal case against the revised penal code. So not because you file a case not because you file a certain case based on a single act, you cannot further file another case with a different nature to that particular act. So my point is, if one action that constitutes bullying, that can be a subject of a civil case, an administrative case, maybe for the teacher, as we mentioned earlier, since they are not covered for the 10627, you can file for the revocation of the license in the PRC. That's actually an admin case against the teacher. But aside from that, you can also file a criminal case against her, just in case she committed acts of bullying to the student. Second mechanism is to take appropriate disciplinary administrative action and notify the parents or guardians of the perpetrator. You also notify the parents or guardians of the victim regarding the action taken to prevent any further acts of bullying or retaliation. If you'd actually notice, in this particular law, RA 10627, it keeps on mentioning about school administrators, parents, the guardians, and the teachers. Why? It's because I think we should approach bullying as an issue that needs a holistic approach, that it doesn't start and the end sa school lang, but it's actually connected at home as well to your environment. So in bullying, it has a social issues that has to be addressed. But in this particular case, in this particular law, we're actually focusing on the policies that the school should adapt to protect the victim and, of course, reprimand the perpetrator. The particular law requires the institution to have a reporting requirement beginning with the school year after the effectivity of this act, and every first week of the start of the school year, school shall submit report to the respective schools division superintendents all relevant information and statistics on acts of bullying or retaliation. The particular government agency that has the main role in this particular law is, of course, DepEd. What is the sanction for non-compliance? In the rules and regulations to be implemented pursuant to this article, the Secretary of DepEd shall prescribe the appropriate administrative sanctions on school administrators who shall fail to comply with the requirements under this act. In addition thereto, every private school shall likewise suffer the penalty of suspension of their permits to operate. So technically, in the absence of any policy that would actually promote or cater anti-bullying, private schools may likewise suffer the penalty of suspension of their permits to operate. So this particular act, RA 10627, if you would actually read it, the penalties does not entail imprisonment or fine. So wala kayong mababasa doon sa batas na ikukulong yung principal or pagbabayarin. So ang penalty, ang sanction for non-compliance, as mentioned in Section 6, is for private school is for the suspension of their permits to operate. But then again, as I mentioned, not because RA 10627 does not mention about imprisonment or fine, the perpetrator may not be held liable to other crimes. Pwede siyang sampahan ng ibang kaso like what is stated in the RPC. Or as I mentioned earlier, if you want to file an administrative case, you can ask for the revocation of the license, just in case ang perpetrator ay teacher. Or in college setting, since most of our participants right now are college students, although you are not covered by the Anti-Bullying Act of 2013 or RA 10627, just in case you experience some form of bullying, there are other laws that actually protect you. We'll run down through these laws after this slide. So according to the implementing rules and regulations of RA 10627, which was actually drafted by Department of Education, they included 3 kinds of bullying, or they enumerated 3 kinds of bullying: cyber, social, and gender-based bullying. So cyberbullying or any bullying done through the use of technology or any electronic means, the term shall also include any conduct resulting to harassment, intimidation, or humiliation through the use or other forms of technology, such as but not limited to texting. Ano lang yung mahirap when it comes to cyberbullying? Because the nature of our technology, for example, this is just based on some of the cases I handle. It is hard to prove cyberbullying because first, as we mentioned, the nature of it's too technical. Sometimes if you file a case for cybercrime, most often than not, the cases were dismissed. It's because we are having a hard time to prove the identity of the perpetrator. Why? For example, on my Facebook page, okay, I post libelous remark to a particular person. And that particular person charged me for a crime of libel, committed to cybercrime. So sometimes that person is having a hard time to prove that it was really me who actually posted that libelous statement. Why? It's not because that I am the owner of that particular account. If there are other no pieces of evidence that would actually conclude that it was me who actually typed that particular libelous statement, and the complainant does not know the time or date kung kailan ko yung ginawa, most often than not, dismiss yung kaso. Why? It's because the complainant is having a hard time to identify that although it was my Facebook account that was used in posting that libelous statement, it cannot be attributed or it cannot be presumed that it was really me who actually posted that statement. So ano yung usually ina-advise? Ang sinasabi, if you could actually ask someone na nakakita kay Ron na siya talaga yung nag-post noon on this particular day, you ask them to execute an affidavit para ma-pinpoint na siya talaga yung nag-post noon. Or the NBI also has some means to detect kung saan laptop ba yung ginamit, kung nasan yung particular person na yun when he posted that, kung ano yung link na like the URL na sinasabi. That's too technical, pero yun nga, due to the nature of cybercrime, sometimes it's really hard to pinpoint or to identify the real perpetrator because of its technicality. So second act is social bullying. It refers to any deliberate, repetitive, and aggressive social behavior intended to hurt others or to belittle another individual or group. Next is a gender-based bullying. Refers to any conduct that humiliates or excludes a person on the basis of perceived or actual sexual orientation and gender identity. As mentioned earlier, di ba? The previous speaker gives example if that is actually part of harassment or not. Well, you can actually, those acts can also be a form of bullying. So pag sinabi ka, pag tinawagan, bakla ka, ganyan, salot ka sa lipunan, that's actually a form of bullying. So it's actually, it is under this particular law. Here, the other applicable laws. We have RA 7610, or also known as a Special Protection of Children Against Abuse, Exploitation, and Discrimination, or the child abuse. So as we mentioned earlier, kung sakali na hindi between students yung act of bullying, it's between maybe a teacher and a student, this particular law can be filed against the teacher, Republic Act 7610, or the Special Protection for Children Against Abuse, Exploitation, and Discrimination. For adults, this is the law applicable to us since hindi kasama ang tertiary or college sa RA 10627. You can file a case against RA 10175 or the cybercrime law. As mentioned in our opening paragraph, online libel, identity theft, and illegal access to online accounts. Third, a person who is aggrieved by a defamatory post in social media may find refuge in the provisions of the Civil Code on damages based on Article 2176 of the Civil Code, which states that whoever by act or omission causes damage to another, there being fault or negligence, is obliged to pay for the damage done. Such fault or negligence, if there is no pre-existing contractual relation between the parties, is called quasi-delict and is governed by the provisions of this chapter. Ganito, ito yung sinasabi natin kanina na a particular act may give rise to a multiple causes of action. But usually, if you file a criminal case, yung civil liability dun kasi naka-attach siya. So the usual practice is you no longer file for a civil action or a civil case. It's because in criminal aspect, in criminal cases, there are two aspects, the criminal liability and the civil liability. So yung civil liability incorporated na dun sa criminal action na ipa-file mo. So aside from filing a criminal action, you may also file an administrative action. What if, for example, the intention was only to commit bullying, okay, between non-minors na, between students, tertiary. Ang intention lang is to bully, maybe slanderous statement. But it turned out, nagkainitan, nagkasuntukan. Can you find any other cases against a perpetrator? Yes. The revised penal code has crimes against persons, for example, serious physical injuries. Papasok yun. Kapag there are different elements of physical injuries. There are serious physical injuries, slight physical injuries, and light physical injuries. Depende dun sa magiging damage on the victim on which case should be applied. So yun yung gusto kong maintindihan ninyo na a single act of bullying, as I mentioned, I keep on repeating, can be a ground for multiple causes of action. So the procedures in handling bullying incidents in schools. So complainants of bullying and other acts under this IRR, implementing rules and regulations, shall be within the exclusive jurisdiction of the department or DepEd or the private school and shall not be brought for amicable settlement before the barangay. So, hindi tama na sabihin nung parents ng victim na ipapabarangay ko si ganito kasi binuli niya yung anak ko. Okay? So according to 10627, the acts of bullying should not be brought to amicable settlement before the barangay, subject to existing laws, rules, and regulation. Complaints for acts covered by other laws shall be referred to appropriate authorities. So what is the procedure? First, immediate response. The victim or anyone who witnesses or has personal knowledge of the bullying incident or retaliation shall immediately call the attention of any school personnel. The school personnel who was notified of a bullying incident shall intervene, should stop the bullying, separate the students, or removing the victim in appropriate cases. Such school personnel should also ensure the victim's safety by determining and addressing the victim's immediate safety needs and ensuring medical attention if needed and securing a medical certificate in case of physical injury. Bringing the bully to the guidance office or the designated school personnel. So for the procedure, the first step is of course immediate response. The second is report the bullying incident or retaliation. A victim or bystander of a school personnel who receives information of bullying, who witnessed or has personal knowledge of any incident of bullying shall report the same to the teacher, guidance, coordinator, or counselor, or any person designated to handle bullying incidents. The bullying incident or retaliation shall be immediately reported to the school head. The designated school personnel shall fill up the intake sheet as provided by DepEd, Order number 40, series of 2012. If an incident or bullying or retaliation involves students from more than one school, the school that was first informed of the bullying or retaliation shall promptly notify the appropriate administrator or school head of the other school so that both schools may take appropriate action. So the jurisdiction of this particular law, it also entails inter-school. Okay? So it only not covers like a particular school, but inter-school in case the bully comes from another school. Reports of incidents of bullying or retaliation initiated by a person who prefer anonymity shall be entertained, and the person who reported the incident shall be afforded protection from possible retaliation, provided that no disciplinary administrative action shall be taken against an alleged bully or offending students solely on the basis of anonymous report. This was actually explained earlier. So after reporting the bullying or incident or the retaliation, the next step is to fact find and documentation. So usually for fact finding or documentation, the sides of the two parties should be taken as part of the due process. You talk to the perpetrator separately, you talk to the victim separately. After fact finding, you document it. Then what's the next step? Next step is for the intervention. The school shall determine the appropriate intervention programs for the victim, the bully, and the bystander. The school head shall ensure that these are provided to them. As we mentioned earlier, the law is actually giving a leeway to the institution to adopt their own policies to promote anti-bullying. Okay, so the intervention really depends on what are the policies and guidelines of the school implement. Next is for the referral. The school head or the child protection committee may refer the victim and the bully to trained professionals outside school, such as social workers, guidance, counselors or psychologists, child protection specialists for further assessment and appropriate intervention measures. The school head or the designated school personnel shall notify the Women and Children's Protection Desk of the local Philippine National Police if he believes that appropriate criminal charges may be pursued against the bully or the offending student. So ito nga yung sinasabi natin kanina that it can mean actually arise to another cause of action. You may file a separate case aside from the 10627. What are the disciplinary measures? All public and private schools shall include in schools protection or anti-bullying policy a range of disciplinary administrative actions that may be taken against a perpetrator or bullying for retaliation. Bullying incidents or retaliation shall be treated according to their nature, gravity, severity, and attendant circumstances. So usually naman, when schools create policies, they actually classify the offense as grave, less grave, or light offenses. So the policy should be humane enough that a particular sanction on the bully should commensurate on the acts done. So that was actually what the law is stating, that although the schools are given the leeway to adopt their own policies or regulations against bullying, so such policies or guidelines should be reasonable enough, not only for the victim, but also for the perpetrator. Because remember, we are dealing with elementary and secondary students concerning this particular act. So the due process, in all cases where a penalty is imposed on the bully or the offending student, the following minimum requirement of due process shall be complied with. First, the student and the parents or guardian shall be informed of the complaint in writing. Okay, so oral report will not suffice. They should be informed in writing. And the student shall be given the opportunity to answer the complaint in writing as well, with the assistance of his parents and guardians. The decisions of the school head shall be in writing, stated the facts and the reason for the decision, and the decision of the school head may be appealed to the division office as provided in existing rules of the department. So usually, ano ba usually yung penalty for erring students in violation of bullying? It can either be expulsion or suspension. It really depends on the school policies and guidelines. So the applicability of RA 9044 as amended and other related laws. If the bullying incident or retaliation resulted in serious physical injuries or death, the case shall be dealt with in accordance with the provisions of 9344, RA 9044, or the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act as amended and its implementing rules and regulations in connection with other applicable laws as may be warranted by the circumstances attendant to the bullying incident. And for the last procedure, the false accusation of bullying. If the student after an investigation is found to have knowingly made a false accusation, the said student shall be subjected to disciplinary actions or to appropriate interventions in accordance with existing rules and regulations of the department or the private school. So these are the sanctions for non-compliance for RA 10627 for public schools, school personnel of public kindergarten, elementary or secondary schools who fail to comply with the provisions of this act or this IRR shall be subject to admin disciplinary proceeding in accordance with the civil service rules and the relevant issuances of the Department of Education. Of course, public schools, public schools and private schools are governed by two different bodies. For public schools, they are governed by the civil service rules, also, and the issuances of the Department of Education. But for private schools, school personnel or private kindergarten, elementary or secondary schools who fail to comply with the requirements of the Act or this IRR shall be subject to appropriate disciplinary sanctions as may be imposed by the private school. A copy of the decision in such cases shall be submitted to the division office. However, the Department of Secretary of Education to the regional director may suspend or revoke as appropriate the permit or recognition of a private school that fails to comply with the requirements under this Act or this IRR. This was actually mentioned earlier that in case for private schools, they do not have policies for anti-bullying as mandated by Anti-Bullying Act of 2013, their operation or their license may be revoked. So as we mentioned earlier, bullying, we should not, first and foremost, we should not tolerate bullying. However, it is hard for private or for institutions involving elementary and secondary. It's because we have to have a concrete plan and action to actually address the bully and the victim. Please keep in mind that in this particular law, the involved students are all minors. In our law, when you are below 18, you are considered as minor. So there are actually special treatment. That's the reason why I'm thinking that there's no specific penalty of imprisonment or fine in this particular act. It's because the parties involved are both minors. So as a holistic approach, students or the private institutions really have they need to come up with a good policy from filing down to the imposition of sanction to address such issues. As always, remember that you should not be afraid to speak what's in your mind or what you have to say. You do not allow the perpetrators or to the bulo to take power over you. You should always stand for yourself. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Yan. Maraming salamat din po, Attorney Ron Gamboa, for sharing the anti-bullying law with us. Likewise, malinaw po yung pagkaka-discuss, no? Kahit kung mapapansin natin ay may pagka-complex yung batas kasi marami pang pwedeng gamitin ng mga batas o kailangan ma-consider, lalo na kapag yung case po natin ng bullying sa mga bata ay medyo severe or complicated. Although the focus of the law is for elementary and secondary schools naman, malaking tulong din ito sa mga kasama natin sa bahay, lalo na yung mga nakakabata natin na mga kapatid, mga pinsan natin at iba pang mga kamag-anak na nagpo-fall under sa age ng elementary at secondary. Yung mga partner communities din natin na naririto kasi ngayon alam na natin kung paano natin i-address o tutugunan yung bullying at kung paano natin makaka-work together yung mga academic institutions, yung mga schools po natin para maiwasan, mas gawing safe at bully free yung yung learning environments po natin. Kasi like kanina, as we mentioned sa mga previous rin po natin topics, pag tayo ay nabubuli o kaya nahaharas, tayo man yun ng bully or tayo yung biktima ng bully, na talagang iba yung scar, malalim yung scar na naiiwan natin sa ating personality at minsan parang lumalala ito, yung trauma nakaka-apekto sa personal growth din natin in the future. So ayun po, maraming salamat po ulit, Attorney Ron, for your presentation, for sharing us the anti-bullying law. So before we proceed po, baka po meron tayong mga questions, clarifications, or gusto po natin humingi ng mga abiso patungkol po sa mga natin, sa mga na-discuss po natin ngayong araw about sa bawal ang bastos law o kaya sa anti-bullying law po. Habang nandito pa po ang ating mga resource persons, I encourage everyone po to utilize the chat box. Pwede po tayong magtanong. Mag-chat lang po tayo para po i-call ko na lang din po yung attention kapag meron po tayong questions. The chat box or the cloud is now open for questions, clarifications coming from our participants. Po kayo mahiya. Alam ko pong very relevant, no? At alam kong lahat tayo meron tayong personal take din or experiences sa dalawang topics po na ating diniscuss ngayong araw. So, if there are questions po, wag po tayo nahiya na magtanong. Parang mukhang wala. Meron po akong nakuhang chat dito. Ang tanong niya po is for Attorney Ron po siguro, pero if knowledgeable din po dito sa area na to si Attorney Marlene, you can also share po. Ano po yung mga batas po, no, na mention po kasi kanina ni Attorney Ron? Ano po yung mga batas on anti-bullying po na covered naman po na pwedeng gamitin ng mga college students po, since tayo po sa Trinity University of Asia ay halos college po or tertiary level na po ang age.
Well, for the participants, for college students, we have crimes under the revised penal code that can be actually attributed to the effects of bullying. First, of course, is libel, as I mentioned earlier. So if someone posts defamatory remarks against you, it's suited for libel. So for the elements of libel, first, of course, it should be malicious. Pag sinawag ka na, anak ka ng, for example, lack for better term, anak ka ng pokpok, anak ka ng PUTA, that is libelous or that's malicious. Second element is defamatory. Surely those statements intend to defame you. Third, it should be in public. It is considered that it is public because people can see it. And fourth, the person must be identifiable. I just want to share, ito kasi yung laging nagiging scapegoat ng mga perpetrators. Lagi nilang sinasabi na, hindi naman namin siya pinangalanan. Hindi ko naman sinabi na sa kanya yan. Well then, jurisprudence states or Supreme Court cases provide na you do not need to name the person, that particular person, but if from your statement, it can actually attribute it to that person alone, you can still be held in violation of libel. So kung nagbigay ka doon ng mga statement na wala nang ibang iisipin kundi yung taong yun, yung pinatatamaan mo, kahit hindi mo siya pinangalanan, you can be held liable for libel. Also, as I mentioned earlier, part of the revised penal code din is yung slander. These are naman spoken false accusation. Pag sinigawan ka, you could file them for case for libel. Meron din tayong catch-all provision under the revised penal code. We call it unjust vexation. Actually, if you will Google it, parang kasama to dun sa mga weirdest laws in the world. Yung unjust vexation kasi, it's a catch-all provision na kapag na-annoy ka, nabwisit ka lang, you can actually file an unjust vexation for that to that particular person. Usually, when we're filing cases, for example, this is actually a famous case years ago between law students wherein nag-file ng, I think, sexual harassment or acts of lasciviousness kasi parang nagkaroon ng lewd design or panghihipo, parang ganyan. Tapos, hindi naakyat ng acts of lasciviousness or sexual harassment, but instead, naibaba ng unjust vexation. Kasi yun nga, any act done against you that annoys you, you can file for unjust vexation. So for college students, yung most cases na pwedeng i-file when it comes to bullying are those provided by the revised penal code.
Thank you po, Attorney. Oo nga. So, bali talagang, kailangan po talaga din mag-consider at saka gumamit pa ng iba pang batas para po talaga ma-protectionan o magamit din po nung magpa-file para ma-protectionan niya yung sarili niya at mapanagutan yung mga nambubuli. Yun pa rin po ba yung term kapag college na?
Ito, libelous statements, slanderous statement are part of parang concept of bullying. When people call you names, di ba? When they intend to degrade your reputation, when they intend to defame you, you're actually in the general concept, you are being bullied. So these particular laws can be actually filed against the perpetrators.
Thank you po for the clarification and answering the question po from our participants, Attorney Ron. How about po, kanina medyo napapaisip din ako dito sa anti-bullying law po kasi meron nga pong student to student. Although na-mention po yung sa Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act po. Paano po yung magiging yung consequences po pag minors ang sangkot sa bullying po?
With minors kasi usually sa liability natin is 15 years old, so hindi naman sila kinukulong yung below 15. There are actually rehabilitation programs intended for minors, for perpetrators. If they're actually being charged for a particular crime and they're found to be guilty, hindi naman sila kinukulong eh. Actually, there are programs intended for them, rehabilitation programs intended for minors.
Thank you po, Attorney. Yan.
Ms. Angie, can I speak also?
Yes po, ma'am. Opo.
Related dun sa yung sa college student, no? Very thin kasi yung line ng gender-based sexual harassment tsaka yung bullying. Kasi actually, gender-based sexual harassment, no? For example, like yung, di ba kanina, yung sasabi natin kung the school is considered a public space, no? Or a public place under RA 11313. So the part of classification A, like what I have discussed kanina, is yung homophobic, transphobic, sexist, or misogynistic remarks. So for example, kung yung homophobic remarks mo or transphobic remark mo ay may sexual underpinning, no? Pwede mo siyang, at the same time, sinasabi yung to bully the person. You can also apply, kung may sexual underpinning siya, you can apply na rin yung RA 11313. So ang magiging ang kanyang magiging kaso na would be gender-based sexual harassment if it's done in school, narinig ng iba, then that would be gender-based sexual harassment in public places. If it's done online naman, then that would be gender-based online sexual harassment. So kasi nga, like what sinasabi nga ni Attorney Ron kanina, ng panyero ko dito na nakasama natin sa lecture, no, wala kasing specific law that covers high school, college students, kasi sinasabi nga it's for basic ed, no, yung anti-bullying law natin. So kung ang kanyang statement na ginagamit sa pambubuli ay may sexual underpinning at nagpo-fall siya under doon sa RA 11313, you can also file RA 11313 instead, no? Yun yung pwedeng kaso mo sa kanya for doing the bullying na nagko-cover doon sa batas. Doon naman sa area ng mga minors, no? As a social worker, I used to handle CICL. We call them children in conflict with the law. Kalimitan talaga, kapag ka below 15, pag 15 below ka, no, wala ka talagang criminal liability. But of course, with the amendment of the law, nakalagay doon pagka ang penalty mo ay mataas or capital ang punishment mo, the child has to undergo psychotherapeutic session. So pwede siyang i-commit din sa Department of Social Welfare and Development Facilities for the child to have a reformative or reformation na mga programs so as to prevent parang ma-prevent mo yung reoffending na tinatawag. Now, pagka naman 50, above 15, below 18, may mga ways kasi ang social workers to check kung meron siyang criminal liability or wala. They have this tool in assessing discernment. So if meron talaga siyang above 15 siya tapos below 18 pero the person or the child acted with discernment, may criminal liability pa rin siya, pwede pa rin siyang masampahan ng kaso. Pero kung wala siyang discernment based on the assessment of the social worker, hindi siya sasampahan ng kaso pero mag-undergo pa rin siya ng rehabilitation programs with the DSWD so as to ensure na hindi siya magre-reoffend. So may mga programs pa rin po ang government, no, na binibigay for these kids so as to ensure that they will not recommit the offense na kanila pong ginawa para magkaroon ng reformation. Kasi RA 9344 as amended, espouse yung konsepto po ng restorative justice. That's why as much as possible, pag children po ang involved, we don't penalize them or we don't treat them as offenders like doon sa mga adult, no? Kaya ang tawag sa kanila ay children in conflict with the law. So yun lang naman po yung additional ko doon doon po sa sharing po, ano, or sa sagot po ni Attorney Ron.
Thank you po. Thank you po, Attorney Ron, and thank you din po sa inyong takes din po, Attorney Mylene. Mas malinaw na, ano? Kasi kanina, ayun din po talaga yung naging wondering ko kasi coming from the development perspective din po, kailangan mo rin talaga ding isipin yung mga kabataan na nasasangkot nga po sa bullying, no? Lalo na yung mga nakakakomit ng crime. What are their chances to rehabilitate and mabago pa yung nila, yung mga personalities nila, makorek yung mga personalities nila na gumagawa ng bullying at iba pang mga crimes ba? I'm sorry, hindi ako masyado maalam sa jargons, pero ayun po, magandang po yun, magandang paglilinaw din po yun on my part para dun sa, lalo na sa concern po sa mga kabataan. Thank you po, mga attorneys. Ayun po, sige po, baka po meron pang ibang mga tanong coming from the students po or faculty and staff na kasama natin ngayon sa ating webinar. Baka po meron tayong mga questions. Feel free po to utilize the chat box po. And we will read na lang po ang inyong mga katanungan. Wala na po. Going once, going twice. Ayan, kung wala na po tayong mga katanungan o kaya paglilinaw, again, maraming salamat po sa ating mga speakers for today.